All right, everyone. Welcome in to the College Football Show. And as we all know, technology can be fun. But I guess before complaining, if no technology, then we're not here. So we do appreciate you all stopping by here at the Voice of College Football. And we apologize that we are a half hour late today. But StreamYard has been down for hours. But fortunately for us, they got their act together and cleaned up the servers and did whatever was necessary to get us on just in time to bring on our first guests. And again, this is the College Football Show, Monday through Friday, right here at the Voice of College Football, 4 p.m. Eastern time. We've got an action-packed show. We've got Kuz's Corner showing up to talk Big 12 and West Virginia. That's at 5 p.m. Eastern time. And then at 6:30, Jonathan from Big Ten Information going to stop by to slice and dice the House settlement and possible realignment moves, as that is his lane and his expertise. We're looking so forward to that. But right out of the gate, we take your comments and questions, of course. But we got Shahan Jayaraja stopping by from CBS Sports. And this is Shahan's first appearance with us here at the Voice of College Football. Shahan, good to see you, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I have been enlightened to your work just in the last couple months, and it's some really good stuff. So we would certainly encourage everyone to check out what you have to say concerning the ever-changing landscape of college football. And you've got Shahan's handle right there on X at the bottom of the screen. So Shahan, it was brought to me by one of our viewers, an offensive line piece that you put together a couple months ago, maybe more recent than that, that made a whole lot of sense to me in regards to basically the theory plays out that the offensive line position is the most difficult one to develop in regards to 17-year-old kids becoming grown men a couple years later and developing the bodies to play at this level. And then, of course, the cohesion and coordination of the offensive line unit, how difficult that is. But you actually put some measurements to it that, again, just kind of reinforced what makes sense in this transfer portal era and how difficult it is to piece together an offensive line that's going to play well together.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating, right? Because I think that we've all seen across college football in the past 5 years or so with the transfer portal and NIL, there's never been more movement than there is right now in the sport. But I think that in so many ways, that's emblemized, I guess you could say, by the offensive line, because ultimately this is a position group that requires 5 players to act as one. It's a position group that takes multiple years to develop. I had multiple people tell me that they feel offensive line is probably the most developmental position in all of football because of, one, what you have to do from a body perspective, getting, a kid who might be 270 pounds coming out to being 310 pounds of muscle at playing weight. And then the other piece of it as well is, again, the actual coaching of how to block, of how to be in the right position, of how to communicate with linemen around you, and how to understand a professionalized scheme like you're going to see at this level. And so when you start bringing players in and out so much more haphazardly, it's just harder than it's ever been to not just get 5 guys who can play at a high level, but to get 8 to 10 so that you have a true, deep, developmental offensive line room.
Shahan Jayaraja joining us from CBS Sports, breaking down college football for us and the latest, obviously, on the national landscape with the settlement we'll get to in just a second. But you actually, with the offensive line situation, made some strong indicators. It's not like there was exhaustive information or volumes that would prove it, but I think it makes total sense. And you pointed to some of the units that have stayed together that actually proved that with the number of starts that they had at their one school after 3 or 4 years, that they were some of the best offensive line units in the country. And the flip side is that the deterioration of some of these units and guys scattering all over the country took some of the better offensive lines and then certainly declined, deteriorated their performance.
Yeah, well, and one metric that I used was I looked at teams that were finalists or semifinalists for the Joe Moore Award, and the number of those lines that have 5 homegrown prospects is pretty remarkable. Like, I think last year there were 8 finalists for, or semifinalists for, the Joe Moore Award. And between those 40 starting players on the offensive line, only about 6 of them were transfers. And the only teams that had multiple transfers on their line were, I believe it was Oregon and Tennessee. Everybody else had 1 or fewer transfers. And the ultimate winner, Army, who of course had a great season last year, was all homegrown players. And I think that even you look at some of the other teams that went deep in the college football playoff. Texas was a fully homegrown offensive line. Notre Dame was a primarily homegrown offensive line. And I think that ultimately there's never been more focus on just being able to keep guys around. And, I got a chance to talk to Miami offensive line coach Alex Mirabal, who's considered one of the best in the sport. And you look at the way that Miami's trying to build their roster, and especially the way that they've grown over the past couple of years, they have been a team that really wants to be a homegrown program. They've only taken 1 transfer a year to maybe add some depth, maybe, somebody who can compete for a starting job. But they have, whatever it is, 16 offensive linemen in a room, and just about 13 of them are kids that they recruited out of high school who they want to be there for multiple years. And I think that long-term is a strategy that's going to serve a program like that well.
And I got to think that that's going to amplify the need for the high school recruiting to be in play and strong along the offensive front. And then obviously, as we have found out from the transfer portal era, it's not just imperative to go out there and supplement your roster or overhaul your roster if you're in certain locations, but also retain the players you already have and kind of resell the program to them and keep them in the door. And then there's also the factor that if you have poor offensive line play, then your skill position players, and especially the quarterback, are more likely to get injured.
100%. And one point that was brought up to me during this process was, look, here's the reality of the situation when it comes to college offensive line play versus even you look at the NFL. Ultimately, you're in a position where if you give up a negative play, whether that be a tackle for loss or a sack, it almost is guaranteed to end your drive at the college level. Like the percentage of drives that end with a punt and not with points whenever you give up a negative play, it's much higher than it is in the NFL. It's something like 75% ultimately end up going nowhere at the college level. And so when you have, that's the thing. The margin for error on the offensive line is so much smaller than it is for really any position. And I even include quarterbacks in that. If you give up 2 sacks in a game, that's a miserable game. It doesn't matter if you blocked 65 snaps. If you have 2 bad ones, that's kind of like all it takes to maybe cost your team a game. And when you start getting to second and third order effects of this, whether it is, a guy maybe miscommunicating, a guy not understanding the technique or where he's supposed to be, a guy not necessarily trusting the guy beside him and overcompensating somewhere else, like these things start to add up. And I think the other point too is that when you talk about sort of the super lines that we had in the 2010s, early 2020s with the Alabamas, the Georgias, it's just harder to keep those guys on campus for multiple years. Again, it's not that hard to have a good 5 at the top, especially for a program like that, but it's really 6 through 13 is where you cost yourself the most, because ultimately you just can't keep those guys on campus before some team's going to come out and try to buy your backups away from you.
Well, Shahan, we appreciate you bringing this to light, putting some metrics to it, confirming it, because we've said here for a long, long time at the Voice of College Football, the offensive linemen they're the guys, they're like the umpires in Major League Baseball. As long as they're doing their jobs, nobody cares, nobody notices, nobody mentions their names. They'll just kind of blindly say, Alabama's got a great offensive line or Georgia's got a great but nobody ever names their names. Unless they obviously miss a tackle, or they're obviously called there at the stadium if there's a hold or an illegal procedure or something, and then you put data behind it. So it was a great read, and I want to bring attention also to Minnie Hunt, who led me to that article. But I've seen since then you've delved into the House settlement, as everyone has, and I gained a lot from one of your recent articles there as well. So let's kind of dive into that, because I think there's been maybe some misinformation in regards to this $20.5 million and how that plays with NIL, or is that completely separate? And then schools, there may be an assumption out there that every school is going to spend $20.5 million. But I believe, based on some of the information I've gathered from you and other sources, that all the conferences, excluding the ACC, all those schools in the conferences have stated up front that they expect to spend the $20.5 million. So we'll start there.
Yeah, so that's the word that we've gotten so far. Now, since then, because the Big 12 confirmed to some of us at CBS Sports that they planned on doing it, there's one or two teams that might take an extra year or an extra 6 months potentially. But ultimately, every team in the Power Conference, I believe, will ultimately be in a position where they're spending at least very close to that number. And within 2 years, I expect every Power Conference team to be at that number. And so I want to draw a distinction for people between rev share and between NIL. So obviously, these two things have kind of been the same thing in this past era, where you're just paying players directly in order for their play. Well, that's about to change. So the revenue share, that $20.5 million cap, that's going to come directly from the schools, and that is completely tied to performance. That is completely tied to, again, like the way that you think about it is, think about the NFL salary cap. You're paid a salary to play within that. The difference is, so now we have NIL. Imagine, for example, that Dak Prescott signed a $5 million endorsement contract with Jerry Jones outside of it. Well, that would be considered cap circumvention at the NFL level. That's what NIL is going to be like heading forward at this level. It's going to be things that, hey, you know what, like you can have endorsement contracts with outside people, but it's going to be confirmed through an independent clearinghouse to confirm that these are real market value endorsement contracts and not just necessarily the pay for play that we've seen from collectives. A spokesperson at Deloitte went to ACC Media Days, and what they said was 90% of NIL deals with private businesses would have been approved under the current rules. 70% of collective deals would have been denied because the vast majority of them are just pay for play deals. So athletic departments and schools and outside boosters and all these people are going to have to figure out the best way to handle all of this. But ultimately, even at the biggest schools and the richest schools, there is an appetite to formally try to reel in this era and create some guardrails that have a chance to work long term.
And Shahan, you would think that the pay for play issue could be circumvented pretty quickly in regards to giving these athletes something to do or to put their name on to, quote unquote, earn that money through NIL.
No, and that's going to be, I think, a huge test for Deloitte's NIL Go platform very early, because, here's the reality. And I'm curious how different athletic departments handle it, because we don't necessarily know. But think of a player like AJ DeBanza, the number one basketball recruit in the country, going to BYU. Well, that guy can probably sign a $2 million shoe contract because he's so high profile. And let's go back to offensive linemen, right? The word is, the reporting is that Jackson Cantwell, a top 5 recruit in the class of 2026, an offensive lineman, is going to receive about $2 million to go to Miami. Well, just realistically, an offensive lineman, even one going to Miami, is probably not delivering $2 million worth of value. So it's going to be interesting to see, how does the NIL Go platform vet that? How do they handle that? How do schools try to use the implicit marketing value of some of these players to their advantage? And how much are, again, especially in some of these key position groups that might not be prestige positions, how do you find a way to divvy up your money under that $20.5 million cap to where they're valued, but also with the understanding that, we probably won't be able to pass a $7 million endorsement contract just quite the same way.
Which is probably healthy for college football, because most of us believe that these athletes need to be compensated, that they have put in, the film study and the lifting weights and running and working out, and obviously the risk of playing the game and all the workouts and everything that they do to put in the time and the effort and to be as good as they are near the professional level and to bring in these billions of dollars, that they should obviously reap some benefits from that, but that it should be not necessarily that in our capitalist society that we should be, looking out for anybody in particular. But the NBA has taught us through the years, through documentaries like we've seen, that putting just ridiculous amounts of money in the hands of a 17-year-old isn't necessarily the healthiest thing for them if it's not monitored or there aren't guidelines and guardrails to some degree.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately, I mean, here's the reality. There's no sport on the planet that has perpetual free agency, that people can just rip up contracts and decide to move somewhere else. It's just, it becomes a competitive issue for the sport if you can't formalize your roster and if there can't be any real rules around it. And so I do think that ultimately, we're going to find some version of this that does make sense for the sport. For quite literally 100 years, right? College football was very much aired towards the power brokers, towards the schools, towards the NCAA. These last 5 years, it's veered completely the other direction, I think, towards, really empowering players. And I think that where we're ultimately going to reside is somewhere in the middle, where we do have, again, a great amount of money. That the number is set at 22% of athletic department budget at the power conference level on average. That's where we get that $20 million number. So that's a sizable amount of money. And, the NCAA has really been spreading. Well, when you think about the combination of that 22% plus athletic aid, plus scholarships, all this sort of stuff, athletic departments will be giving close to 50% of their total budgets directly to players. And you know what? That's probably something that makes sense with the way that these athletes create value and are utilized on the national stage. But again, that has to, at some point, whether it's through collective bargaining, whether it's through the House case, whether it's through federal legislation, you do need some sort of guardrails in place on the other side so that we can really have a sport that's able to be competitive and that we can ultimately have a product that's able to last a long time.
Yeah, the sport was not built to be a business. It was basically a club sport back in the 1860s, 70s, and then and then obviously with the advent of television, then it exploded and became very popular, but for decades was still in this amateur model, but it was going to burst at some point because you get this amateur model that's been growing through the years, but you've got this big business component, and the two just are not comparable. They're not compatible, I should say. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to really go back and see what the root cause of all this was, you got to go back to 1984 with the NCAA versus Oklahoma case, that ultimately meant that the NCAA could not cartelize television rights, that each individual school and each individual conference had the right to negotiate their own rights. And really, since that moment, we've seen an explosion in college athletics, both in terms of interest, but also in terms of the sheer amount of money that's entered the sport. And so, again, like you said, I mean, it's complicated to try to work both factors, both the educational and amateur factors, along with the amount of money and the professionalized structure. But ultimately, again, there's just no other sport on the planet that does not have some level of roster rules and guardrails and salary rules. And so it'll be interesting to see, again, what timeline we ultimately end up on to find final solutions to these problems.
Shahan, we appreciate you being here, and certainly I want to respect your time. So if you need to go, but I wanted to hit two more questions if you do have a couple more minutes. One would be tied to exactly what we're talking about with the transfer portal. So I think the average college football fan has become a little bit tainted and bitter by the transfer portal. Has been exactly, you keep going to the NFL for comparisons, and I think it's a perfect example where the NFL once again seems to do everything right. Everything that they do, it's either been just the nature of the sport has allowed them to flourish, or they've just made right moves. And the average NFL fan can look at their team from season to season and be comfortable that my team's going to be back next year. The bulk of my team's going to be back. So I'm secure. My guys are going to be there. I can grow this attachment to them. But there's still that mystery and that excitement of free agency, that we may get a few guys, or a few guys may leave my team. So there's that excitement component to free agency, but there's still this majority stability within the league. The transfer portal hit, you go from players can't go anywhere unless they're hardship cases or graduates at that point, to just where we've got players, as you well know, that not only go from season to season, one team to another, but they'll play with one team for a season, then they'll transfer to another team. They're there for spring practice, and then they go to another team and don't even play for the middle team, where there are no regulations. So do you think this is going to help us get to somewhere of a freedom of choice for the athlete, but still within some type of guardrails?
Yeah, I do think so. There's been conversation about, moving to one transfer window. I think that would also be a significant move. The SEC has kind of set that precedent where they don't allow teams to transfer between SEC teams in the post-spring window because, again, it does become a competitive issue when you don't have sort of rules in place. And so I think that's one part of it. One thing I'm going to be fascinated by is whether and frankly when the idea of contracts being binding comes into play. So there was the case of a player at Wisconsin who signed a 2-year rev share contract and then decided to unenroll and enrolled at Miami. And Wisconsin said, well, we feel like these contracts are binding. Well, at this point, that hasn't happened. And another case was the case of Nico Iamalieva's younger brother, Madden, who enrolled at Arkansas, was paid money as part of that, and actually had a buyout written into his contract at Arkansas that now Arkansas might try to come after because he ultimately transferred to UCLA. So I think that it'll be fascinating to see when, especially since the House case has now officially been approved, do we start seeing some of these contract stipulations start to be enforced? Because again, like in European soccer, for example, you can move players at any time, but you have to pay a transfer fee in order to do that. You have to pay a buyout, essentially, of the existing contract. That's something that I think will be fascinating to see whether it holds up. But I think that on both sides, there's a lot of motivation to try to figure out long-term, what's the best structure that's going to allow players to both make decisions that make sense for them while also respecting the competitive balance of college athletics.
Shahan, you say you're going to be fascinated by this. This is what's going to fascinate me. So we got this $20.5 million. The first point of fascination is going to be, how is that going to be distributed among the sports? And we've got a pretty good idea what that's going to look like. It's not going to be tied directly to the revenue share. Let's say football brings in 77% of the money at Michigan. That doesn't mean it's going to be exactly tied to that, but it's going to be roughly what that is. But then there's going to be some type of share to the other non-revenue sports. But what is truly going to fascinate me is, let's say $15 million goes to football, roughly. How is that going to be distributed among the players? Because the fair way to do it would be to actually play the season and then determine their value. But nobody else does that in professional sports. Obviously, their numbers determined before they actually play the season. But to determine the value of each individual in that 105-man roster,
it's going to be really fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think that one thing that people should pay attention to is look at the way that college front offices are being restructured. You're bringing a lot of people who have NFL backgrounds, and it's for that reason exactly, because they've spent the past several years at the NFL level figuring out, how do we evaluate players? What is a position worth? What's a position group worth? What's a quarterback worth? Because, if this was strict endorsement, right? Like the quarterback is worth 8 times as much as everybody else. Well, that's not as true when you compare them. Again, when you look at NFL contracts, quarterbacks make the most. Left tackles make a lot of money. You're not getting a lot of endorsement value for left tackles, but they are critically important players. At the college level, historically, defensive tackles are incredibly valuable because there are just so few bodies that have legitimate NFL potential. And so I think that a huge subplot of the next couple of years is going to be, okay, which programs are able to manage their salary cap best. I am confident there will be some programs that try to figure out a Moneyball approach, whether it's, hey, we're going to really invest hard into a certain type of athlete or a certain position group that maybe is an inefficiency compared to other teams. But like, everybody's going to approach it just a little bit different. And I think, again, there will be, especially in these first 5 years, I'm sure, a team that figures out, again, that inefficiency that they're really able to take advantage of and ride it to a couple of really good seasons.
Shahan Jayaraja joining us from CBS Sports. Shahan, we so much appreciate you stopping by. It's been a great conversation. I've enjoyed your work, and thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. We will keep it rolling here at the Voice of College Football. Yeah, they still haven't fixed these windows on StreamYard, but we'll do the best we can. It's time to bring in Justin Walker. You can catch Couz's Corner right here on YouTube. Before we get to Justin, the reminders that the Amazon links in the description section of all the videos, every video here at the Voice of College Football, including this one. Please grab the Amazon link. And when you do, and somebody just reminded me yesterday that they grabbed the Amazon link, so thank you. It's an easy thing to do. And they said, remind everybody, you know who it was. It was Cam Underwood, who does the Miami show with me, and actually turned it into a mini commercial because he said, you know what? He stopped me while I was pushing the Amazon link. He goes, Mark, I used the Amazon link this week. Yeah, you just use it. Still recognizes, boom, your name, your account, keeps all the information right there. It's seamless. So it's one way you can contribute to the Voice of College Football without spending a penny. So please use the Amazon link in the description section down below. Keep in mind that the audio from all these podcasts here at the Voice of College Football, the live streams, are on your favorite audio platform. We got Couz's Corner stopping by. I've wanted for a while here to get Justin to drop by. Justin, what's going on?
Hey, Mark. Thanks for having me, man. How you doing?
Absolutely. Doing well. Good to see you. And we'll remind everyone right off the top, Couz's Corners right here on YouTube, doing great work covering West Virginia, the Big 12, and college football across the board. All right, Couz. We could be sitting here for hours on end all night trying to figure out what this is going to look like in years to come. But what is your initial take on this House settlement? Do you think it cleans things up or maybe brings more questions to the table? What's your general feel about where this is headed and if it's actually somewhat good for the game?
I think it's at least got it moving in the right direction by installing whatever the word is there, some guardrails around everything and trying to put some form of normalcy, less chaos, a framework, so to speak, around the whole thing. And hopefully we'll somehow get some semblance of parity and a level playing field as much as you can, right? I mean, there's always going to be some teams with an advantage, but at least a little bit of a fair playing field for everybody, especially at least at the Power 4 level anyway. But Mark, we both know, man, it's not the end all be all. I mean, we've already seen there are already lawsuits coming up that are going to be filed from a group of women athletes that are not happy with, the unfair payout in their mind that, where Title IX is not being applied to the revenue sharing. I mean, there's probably going to be lawsuits coming when the first NIL deal gets turned down. I mean, we're definitely not at the end of the road, but I think at least it's a start.
Yeah, at least we know what we're dealing with here, right, and how it's going to be dealt with. Our previous guest made a comment, and you follow this stuff, I got to say, on a regular basis better than I do in many ways in terms of the landscape of the sport, the realignment that not necessarily attached to this, but in some ways could be. But with where these collectives are doing it generally what's considered to be the right way, and about 90% of those would go through this clearinghouse. But these booster groups and these individual billionaires and millionaires that are doing what they're doing and giving out money for next to nothing. That's not going to fly. So
Right. Exactly. I think they said about 80% of them would have been turned down.
Yeah, exactly.
Under this new clearinghouse. But is it going to hold up legally? Can you cap how much a person is able to make? If you've got a business willing to pay somebody $2 million and they say now you can't pay them $2 million, is that going to hold up in court? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out.
I wrestle with that too, because the capitalist in me says that's not going to fly because, hey, regardless of what we personally think about these deals and what these athletes are making, hey, if there's somebody around that's willing to fork over the money, then, hey, we live in a free society. And in principle, I have no issue with that. I don't necessarily think it's good for 17-year-olds to be walking around with $10 million in their back pocket. But then again, if you can bring all this under an umbrella, an organization to say, well, if you choose by signing a scholarship and a contract to play under our rules, then you give up some of those just outlandish rights to just make anything. It has to be somewhat circumvented and somewhat there are procedures to be followed. So yeah, smarter minds will figure that out, or hopefully smarter minds. I don't know. Maybe they aren't always. Some are, some aren't.
Well, but they're probably smart. They're a lot of them have more money than they know what to do with.
Yeah, exactly. That's a lot of it right there. I wanted to hitch up on West Virginia, of course, in the Big 12. So some of these preseason magazines aren't too high on West Virginia, but you saw that a couple of years ago, and the team went 9-4.
Right.
Of course, they're coming off just a 6-win season, and that's one reason why Neil Brown doesn't have a job, and Rich Rod has been called back after doing a nice job at Jacksonville State. So we'll start there because I think people are just intrigued with Rich Rodriguez. He's a personality. He's got a guy with very strong opinions. What he did the first time at West Virginia was remarkable. Hate to bring it up, an eyelash away from playing in a national championship game, which people couldn't fathom now. If you're just a college football fan who just arrived in the last 5 years, that West Virginia is going to play in a national championship game, but they were that good. So just your thoughts about Rich Rod coming back. I see 3 returning starters, depending on your count, but
yeah,
a lot of transfers, 40,
right. 50. To be
50. Okay.
Well, it depends on what you're reading, but I think it's about what I've noticed, Mark, in researching this stuff. One site might say 35, another one might say 40. I mean, it's just all over the place. But I guess it depends on, are you counting JUCO guys as transfers? Are you counting, who knows? But anyway, 40 to 50 transfers. We'll say that, but it's a lot either way. And then if you add freshmen to the mix, it's like 60 to 70 new players. So it's a ton. But I mean, look, here's what I said on my show. Do I think West Virginia is going to finish dead last in the Big 12 like Phil Steele predicted? I don't. But as someone, I mean, you and I analyze teams and games and rosters. If you look at a roster that's replacing 50 people, are you going to pick them to finish very high in the league? I'm not. So I think it's fair that they have them finish last. I don't think they'll be that bad, because when you look at Rich Rod's track record, he's very rarely been that bad. Even years he's had to rebuild teams, he's not been that bad. I mean, he had 60 new players at Jacksonville State last year and still went out and won 9 games. So I think they'll be better than the worst team in the conference. But I also don't think they're going to go out here and compete for a conference championship either in year one. I just think there are too many unknowns and too many question marks for that.
Unless some of these programs at the top distinguish themselves and kind of break from the pack even more, this conference, for as balanced as it is right now, there's a possibility that it becomes even more balanced, because the underbelly of this conference, the Cincinnati's and Houston's, they may not be ready to compete right now, but as they continue to integrate and build depth and build up their programs, they should be legitimate power conference teams and programs here in the next year or two. And then it's going to be a real free for all. And it already is.
Right.
So let's stay with West Virginia before I get your take on the Big 12.
Yep.
Nico Marchiol is going to be the starting quarterback, or with the Texas A&M transfer, Jalen Henderson, is he going to push him a little bit?
I think he'll push him. It's a true competition. I mean, when you look at Rich Rod has said from day one, it's a true competition. He actually, if you look at quoting this year's Phil Steele, he actually told Phil Steele that he thinks it's the deepest quarterback room he's ever had. So take it for what it's worth. But I mean, you got somebody who can run the football really well, like Jalen Henderson. You've got somebody who's a decent runner but can also throw it, like Nico. I think it's going to come down to the wire. And heck, we might even see both guys play some snaps in the first couple of weeks of the season until they really figure out. Hopefully they have a starter picked out by week 3 when the team up north comes down to Morgantown. But I think it's anybody's ball game at this point between those two guys.
Jamori Henderson or Robinson out of Texas San Antonio, probably the highlight on defense, is an incoming transfer from Texas San Antonio. 10.5 sacks. So what's your gut feeling when you put together what the downside of all the transfers, but Rich Rod probably upgrading, just by sheer will and presence, maybe getting a little bit more out of these guys. Nico's been around a while now, and Jalen Henderson showed some flashes at Texas A&M. So at least you got a serviceable backup, maybe to a greater degree than you've had in the past.
Correct.
Don't know what the schedule looks like exactly, but a Big 12 schedule is kind of tough to grade compared to the other conferences.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Neil Brown got fired for a reason, Mark. I mean, the talent at West Virginia has not really been up to the standard that it needed to be in a lot of cases, in some positions primarily. Offensive line was good. Running backs were good. Everything else you could question probably, right? But the one thing Rich Rodriguez is you're never going to have to question with him is, are his guys ready to play, which sometimes was questioned under Neil Brown, because his coaching style is just not going to allow it. Because if you're not, you won't play. I mean, it's that simple. And when you look at as far as talent level goes, I mean, again, if the talent level was there, they probably wouldn't have, he wouldn't have got fired. And I mean, you look at some of the guys he brought in. I mean, you mentioned Jamori Robinson. He was Defensive Player of the Year at UTSA a year ago. Could have potentially went into the draft and gotten drafted. He was that good. Michael Coach Jr. is a defensive back out of Nevada that was a first team all conference player. He could be a next level guy. There are a lot of guys that he has brought in. You may not know their names yet because they were playing at the G5 level for most of their career, but they're still really good players. And then he brought over a few guys from Jacksonville State that are good, that are going to know how his system runs, know what he expects. I think that'll be useful. We saw what Kurt Signetti did a year ago with some guys he brought from James Madison. Now, Rich Rod's not bringing that many, but it's good to have a core of guys that can kind of lead the way and let the rest of the team know what to expect. So I do like a lot of the pieces he brought in. My biggest fear is depth. Are you going to have enough depth at key spots like the offensive line where they're losing everybody pretty much? In certain spots on the team, receiver, is the depth going to be there? Can you put together a solid 2 deep for injuries and other things that might pop up? That's our biggest concern.
Big 12 is an interesting conference because anyone can beat anyone for the most part. Obviously, Iowa State, Kansas State, there are some teams that have separated, and Arizona State's fascinating, of course, now based on what they've done. And I don't want people to forget that they outplayed Texas for 2 to 3 quarters in that game and came within a 4th down play of winning that game to move on against what might have been the second best team in the country. So the Big 12 has nothing to be ashamed of. What's fascinating is that I don't know if this Colorado mystique is going to stay for as long as Deion's there. It's fading a little bit because obviously things are exciting at the beginning, but they are still maintaining this presence in the conference where the top 10 TV rated games in the Big 12 were still Colorado games last year by a huge margin.
Yep.
Do you think that's good for the conference to have one guy kind of dominate not on the field, but dominate the attention?
Honestly, Mark, I don't think it can hurt right now because the Big 12 needs something to bring attention to the league. You know, it's a great league. It's a fun league, a very balanced league you talked about earlier, but we don't have that big brand. We don't have that, you know, even at the ACC, they at least have, you know, ACC might have some problems, but they at least have Florida State. They at least have Clemson. They at least have Miami. You've got 3 really high caliber brands that are going to bring 2+ million viewers a week, if not more. The Big 12 really doesn't have a team or a brand that brings that type of viewing power, so to speak. So it's good to have it. I mean, anytime you can get eyeballs on your league now, like you said, the mystique's going to wear off, the excitement's going to wear off over time. But man, strike while the iron's hot and take advantage of it, man. Now it's probably not going to help you a ton of long term because he's not going to be there forever. But again, anything that can bring attention to the Big 12, in my opinion, especially, you know, Brett Yormark's a branding guy. It's kind of what he's known for. So I'm sure he loves it. But yeah,
And Yormark was going to be the next guy I was going to bring up.
Yeah.
Are you happy with him and the job that he's done?
I think so. I haven't agreed with everything he's done, but I think overall, I mean, you know, he was able to get the TV deal done before the Pac-12, which ultimately probably led to their collapse. You know, that could have been the Big 12. You know, that could have happened to them had they not gotten the deal when they did. Yeah, he may have left some money on the table, but they were able to solidify a place, you know, in college athletics, you know. So you got to applaud him for that. You know, he's thinking outside the box, you know, Big 12 Pro Day, just other things he's trying, you know, partnership with the WWE that some people think silly, but again, he's just trying to find ways to get people's eyeballs on the Big 12, you know, because they need that. They need that attention. They need the brand notoriety. And hopefully, if somebody comes and turns the Big 12 on because of WWE Superstar is going to be on there, maybe they'll stick around and watch the game. You know, that's what you got to hope for anyway. So, yeah, I mean, the Big 12 is not in a position to where they can do the same thing everybody else is doing, so they've got to think outside the box, and I think he's a guy who can do that.
Justin, you do a great job of following the realignment trails, and the latest that we got of significance that's concrete is the ACC revenue sharing deal and the 60-40 split that they determined. And if anyone's behind on that news, it's basically, you know, 6 weeks ago, 60% of the ACC media rights revenue goes as a basically a popularity determination of the TV ratings and the math equation to determine who gets that 60%, then the 40% is split evenly among all the schools. And so the ACC kind of put a Band-Aid on its situation right now because a lot of the deal that was put together almost points to doom in the future because the buyout or the payout to leave the league is minuscule. But what I'm pointing to since then, now we had, of course, the SEC coaches and commissioner got together at their meetings in Destin, Florida last week, and a lot of rhetoric comes out of there. And it seems like Greg Sankey's pretty verbose about the SEC's place in college football and wanting to change things, correct things, and being the driving force in all of that. And then, you know, making it very known that there's possibly there is in play a partnership with the Big Ten. So do you in any way fear for West Virginia if it is a 48 team deal, if the Wake Forests of the world get pushed aside, do you think that's in any way jeopardizes West Virginia? Because my first thought is that it obviously shouldn't. It's just too strong of a football program and brand and tied to the history of the sport, you would think, but based on what we've witnessed over the last 5 or 6 years, who knows?
Mark, I could rant about this for an hour, but I won't. I think about it almost every day, man. But I am concerned because obviously I'm biased, but I do see West Virginia as a really good brand. I mean, they're the 15th winningest program of all time. Winningest program that doesn't have a national championship. I mean, you go down one of only 2 athletic programs that are top 25 in wins in both football and men's basketball. I mean, there's a lot of, I could sit here and lay out all the positives, but here's the problem. Everything today seems to be driven by money, market size, population, even academics is starting to play, seems to be playing a huge role in some of these realignment decisions because it's school presidents who are making them at the end of the day. And that's something I think a lot of people fail to talk enough about. And when you look at West Virginia is a very small state, a very poor state, one of the poorest states in the country. I'm sure that's not super attractive to advertisers, right? Have a very passionate fan base and a decent sized fan base, but they're probably in the top 30 in fan base in the country. They're never going to be able to compete with Ohio State, Notre Dame, Texas, Alabama, those schools. So yeah, I'm definitely concerned. Now, I've even been on record saying it might even be better at some point for the P2 to break away, do their own thing, and let West Virginia, their peers, do their own thing. I wouldn't, deep down, I would not like that to happen. I don't want that to happen, but I think we might be heading in that direction at some point, as much as it pains me to say. And I fear that West Virginia won't have a seat at the table.
Because I got to think the competitor in you, for as difficult as it's going to be for West Virginia to win a national championship in football, the competitor in you and West Virginia fans would be that if we're playing this AAA level football and we win that national championship, that it's just not going to satisfy like it is competing, even if you don't get to the mountaintop.
Yeah.
With the SEC and the Big Ten. Or maybe it shakes out this way, and I'm sure you've gone over this. The ACC loses the likes of Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and then the likes of Louisville, NC State. That next layer runs for the Big 12. The rest of the
which I would love to happen,
explodes and probably goes to the American Conference and becomes G5.
Right.
And, the Big 12 becomes the Big 20 or so. And it's even a stronger league and can at least, it's going to be a distant third, but at least playing with the power boys. Yeah.
Yeah. That's, I hate to wish for the downfall of a conference, Mark. I don't like to be that guy. But I worry that if something like that doesn't happen, that West Virginia will get left out. And at the end of the day, I'm a West Virginia fan first. And I want my team to be included. But, you look at the finances, West Virginia has one of the lowest budgets of any program in the country. I'm still puzzled at how they're going to come up with this $20.5 million. They say they're going to do it. They've committed to doing it. I'm still trying to me, the math doesn't math, but, Ren Baker's a great AD. He'll figure it out. But, I mean, they have a $106 million athletic budget. And you're going to take $20.5 million of that and pay players with it?
And the media rights is
it doesn't add up,
right? That media rights per year.
30, well, the base is 31.6, and then all in, they're probably going to make around 50. All in, once you count NCAA tournament, college football playoff, everything, they should be somewhere in the $50 million range. But the problem is the SEC and Big Ten are sitting at 90 are going to be at 90 to 100 million.
Sure.
I mean, how do you compete with that?
Yeah, and then look at these figures for college football playoff participation, and if that deck is stacked against you in the Big 12 and the ACC with 4 and 5 Big Ten and SEC teams gobbling up $4 million per game, that really extrapolates. I ran some math that I knew was going to be very rough, but I ran it through a few people that I respect, and they thought it was fairly close. I took the ratings, the TV ratings of the ACC the last 2 years. And then I ran it through this 60-40 percentage model. And then if you say the ACC is bringing in, roughly $40 million a year media rights from Disney. So it's $80 million over 2 years. And then I applied that formula to the TV ratings and just took the percentage of, Florida State 17%, then they get, and it stretches the Florida State and Clemson's from 80 million to like 130. And it drags the Wake Forest and so forth down to 21 million. And Stanford's only getting a 30% cut, and Cal's only getting 30%, and SMU's obviously said forget it.
Stanford's got more money than all the other schools combined. Mark, I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, they'll be okay.
Cal maybe not though. Cal's struggling, I think.
Yeah, they have a lot of facility issues out there that they need to address.
Yep.
Stanford, the thing that I've never had anyone settle for me on Stanford is how much are they willing to take this ridiculous endowment on the academic side and give it to sports, though.
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't know if they're willing to mix those two numbers or not.
Who knows? It's hard to tell. But yeah, it's definitely going to be. If I'm Louisville, Mark, and Louisville, I'm sure feels good about their brand. Louisville's a strong. I mean, they've won national championships in basketball. They've been successful in football. They, in the BCS era, they played in some BCS bowl games. They haven't made the CFP yet, but they've come close. I mean, they had a Heisman Trophy winner a few years ago, Lamar Jackson. So I mean, they're a good, solid program. If I'm Louisville, and I see Florida State, Clemson, and Miami getting everything handed to them basically, just because of their brand, and not saying they haven't earned it. I mean, those have been. But still, if you put yourself in the seat of that AD or that president, you think your school deserves that too, right? And I'm sure there are a lot of schools in that conference that feel the same way. And they get to play more games against Notre Dame than you do. They get more of the revenue than you do. At some point, they're going to be like, you know what? We're getting tired of being treated, or they could get tired. We're getting tired of being treated like second-class citizens here. And the Big 12 could be over there going, hey, guys, if you come here, we'll have equal revenue sharing. We're going to treat you just like everybody else. Now, the key is, though, where's the money going to land? Is the ACC, would that move make them that much more money? There's so many questions around all this. It's what makes it intriguing to talk about. But it's definitely interesting to see how it all shakes out in the next 3, 4, 5 years. As these buyouts decrease in the ACC and become more affordable. And now, you got private capital and private equity involved in college sports now. How many of these schools go find a private equity company to buy their way out of a conference? It's going to be very interesting to see how all this shakes out down the road.
Yeah. And with Louisville on board, you'd have a nice little old Big East quadrant over there.
I'd like to get Louisville, NC State, Virginia Tech,
Pitt,
and probably either Pitt or Syracuse.
Cincinnati. You'd have a nice little.
And if you had Louisville and Pitt, you're adding 2 more rivalry games into your, or actually 3 more rivalry games into your, because Cincinnati Louisville's a rivalry. Pitt Cincinnati is a rivalry. Not to the same level as Pitt West Virginia, but there is a rivalry there. West Virginia Louisville's a little bit of, at one time had a pretty decent rivalry going. And geographically, it gives West Virginia some more, and Cincinnati in that case, some more schools that are within driving distance, right? Which, at the end of the day, these athletic departments don't like spending all this money on travel.
Yeah.
And the wear and tear it takes on the student athletes, especially in the Olympic sports. Not so much in football, but on the Olympic sports. I mean, it's at some point, man, somebody's got to have some common sense and bring this thing back down to earth, you would think.
Yeah. The Cal tennis team traveling to Wake Forest for weekend tournaments just doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
I mean, the student part of student athlete was thrown out the window a long time ago.
For sure. Justin, let us know what you got going on there at Coos's Corner.
Hey, Mark, just trying to find content this time of year, man. It's not easy, as you know, probably as someone who, I'm actually been sitting around today trying to figure out why my channel numbers are dropping. It's very aggravating, but anyway, I'm sure I'm not
right
the only
there
one.
with you.
Been on the phone with some guys today talking about that, trying to get some tips. But no, it's just, I'm covering a little bit, anytime news breaks about recruiting or anything like that, I'm always on it for West Virginia. I've been talking about the college football playoff models, the 4-4-2-2-1-3 versus the 5-11. I've actually changed my opinion on that, so to speak.
Okay.
Through this ordeal.
Yeah, I should be asking you about that before you go. What do you like? What do you like that's reasonable and feasible? that's on the table?
First of all, I think they both suck for the Big 12.
Okay.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Start with that. Because either way, the Big 12 is going to get probably 2 at the most years, max. The competitor in me, the sports purist in me, likes the 5+11 because you get your best teams. Your conference champions, who I think deserve a spot, and then you have your best teams, right? That's how sports should be played. Your best teams are competing for the title. You're not handing it to somebody because of the conference they're in automatically, right?
Yeah, I hate that.
It doesn't devalue the regular season as much, all that stuff, right? I love those and that's the side I was on, and I was on that side almost to the death. Like I was fighting tooth and nail with some of my fellow creators about that. Then as I start sitting back and thinking more about it, and I listened to other people's opinions, and I thought, in today's world, how many people are doing what's best for the sport and what's best for college football, right? Nobody. So if you want to be Brett Yormark and Jim Phillips, and you can do that, you can try to do that and do the right thing. But in the meantime, you might be killing your conference. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. So I've actually come around and started kind of changing my mind. And from a Big 12 perspective, I think the 4-4-2-2-1 model is actually better for them because Mark, I'm worried that in most years, Big 12 is only going to get one team in a 5-11 model because the SEC is out trying to change. They're out trying to get the rules changed to benefit them so that they can get 6, 7, 8 teams in almost every year. And that frustrates me. And if they're going to do that, then just go to the 4-4-2-2-1-3 and call it a day so that the SEC can't basically dominate the access to the playoff.
Sure, you heard they even during these SEC meetings threw out the ridiculous thought that they would play like an 1-8-2-7-3-6-4-5 SEC final weekend where they already know the top 4 or 5 are getting in. So that only leaves an entry for those 6, 7, 8s to say, hey, number 8 just beat number 1 or 7 just beat 2. Yeah. So they're really good too.
And if you and how can you sit there and give an 8th place team in a conference a spot over a team who finished 3rd place in the ACC or the Big 12? That just doesn't. And I'm not saying the Big 12 and ACC are better leagues but we're talking about 8th place, Mark.
Yeah, we're talking about 8th place.
Where's the common sense in that?
So, I would be for it if it weren't a play-in game. Both the SEC and Big Ten are talking about doing this and just having them be play-in games. Mm-hmm. If you want to set this up for the final weekend, the 2 things I like about it is, number 1, it provides a mystery to the final weekends of the season, because much like we had the COVID year in 2020, when the Big Ten decided to do this, now half the games were canceled, so it didn't matter. But they said, we're going to do this the last weekend of the season. So there's 2 weeks left in the year. You don't know who's going to play the last weekend. It's just interesting to see the next to last weekend play out and then say, oh, we're going to see Tennessee and Georgia play, and we're going to see Ole Miss and Texas A&M play. We had no idea. It's just kind of fun.
Right.
But not make them automatic play-in games. Just make them another data point to be considered.
Yeah.
We've trusted this committee, Justin, for 11 years, and I'm not a big fan of the committee. I think they've done a reputable job. I can't point to any year and say they screwed it up. They didn't get it right.
Well,
they have.
2 years ago they did. Florida State should have been in 2 years ago.
Yes.
But that's you may not agree with me on that. But I
agree with you. They went 13-0.
But outside of the one or two anomalies, like last year, I didn't really have a huge problem with who got in last year.
I did not either.
Now you could make arguments for Alabama and BYU and Ole Miss, but when you put the resumes up, there's not there wasn't a ton of difference.
Bad losses.
Yeah,
they all had bad losses. And my point was going to be, and again, I would rather have an objective system, but we've entrusted this committee for 11 years, and if you're going to entrust this committee and they haven't screwed it up, then allow them to select and not say, it's got to be 4-4-2-2.
Yeah.
No.
Well, the committee would only be, in that case, the committee would only be select. They would be doing the seeding, and they would be picking the 3 at-larges. And heck, and Notre Dame would automatically get one of those if they qualify, if they're in the top 16. So then you'd only be picking 2, essentially. You're almost taking it totally out of their hands. Now, like, again, I'm not a huge fan of that.
Yeah.
But as a fan of a Big 12 team, I think West Virginia would have a better chance to get in the playoff with that model.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that's why I'm starting to kind of come around. Here's what I'd like to see: a 4-4-3-2-1-2 model. Let the ACC and Big 12 have a playing game against each other to see who gets that third automatic bid out of one of their leagues. That would be fun.
That would be fun.
Let your 2 third-place teams in each league. Last year it would have been what? It would have been
Colorado,
Miami and BYU, maybe.
Yeah, BYU. Yeah, Miami. That would have been a fun game.
Yeah,
that'd have been great.
And both teams were good. You'd had that great BYU defense against that great Miami offense. Who don't want to watch that? You know, and the winner of that gets the 3rd spot, and then the other conference only gets the top 2 in. Got to give a shout out to Numbskull News for coming up with that one, but I don't think he came up with it, but he's been promoting it on his channel. But yeah, I mean, that's what I'd like to see, because that adds even more intrigue, and you get a chance for a 3rd team from your league to get in. But the SEC and Big Ten are never going to allow that. So,
Justin, Tony Petiti of the Big Ten had only been in the job for a couple of weeks, and he made a statement, and that's what tipped me off. And I'm not the brightest guy out there. I'm sure it tipped off many. He said, "It's my job, obviously, to promote this league and do what's best for this league. So, number one, we are going to ensure that our elite teams and major brands are playing against each other more in late October and November." I thought, okay, great. But then his next sentence was, "And I'm going to ensure that we have more teams in the college football playoff." And I thought, well, those 2 things contradict each other, because you're going to be giving your best teams more losses. So then I thought something's working here. He's working on something.
That's what exactly. And he was the one who came up with the automatic bid idea. And that's why they want to do that, because they can also play their non-conference games against SEC teams to bring in even more, which it was another argument I had against that. If you're the Big 12 and ACC, do you want to see the SEC and Big 10 playing all their non-conference games against each other now and leaving you out? And then they get even more TV revenue than you're getting. I mean, it's like it never ends, man, at some point. But then I sit back and think, well, that all sounds great. And on paper, it works. But at the end of the day, let's look at reality. How many teams is the Big 12 really going to get in under a 5-11 model? You'd get 2 in some years. You might get 3 once a decade, but every other year you're probably getting 1.
Yep.
And I just don't think that's not good for the league.
No, it's not. And I can't fault any of these guys. They're doing what they're called to do, running their conference. They're not hired to run the sport or do what's best for college football. They're hired and paid by the SEC and the Big Ten.
Correct. And I think, when you and Mark and Phillips make those statements, I think there's some political posturing, positioning going on there. Maybe PR. They're trying to get good PR for their leagues and make the SEC and Big Ten look like the bad guys, right? Because they're the ones trying to do the wrong thing for the sport. But at the end of the day, I'm sure that deep down they really want what's best for their leagues. But yeah, Mark, did you think 10 years ago we would be sitting here today talking about this stuff? Man, what college football at one time was one of the most what's the word I'm looking pure things.
Yeah.
We could sit down every Saturday, watch the greatest sport on the face of the earth, guys out there fighting and battling and clawing for their school, the name across the front of their chest. And every single game meant something. It was a treat. It was you earned a spot in any bowl game. Like it was cool just to go to a bowl game.
Oh, now I love bowl season.
Now, all they talk about from week 1 to the end of the year is the college football playoff. That's all they talk about. Every show, Who's going to make the college football playoff? Who's going to make the college football? The regular season has lost so much of its luster, man. It's I mean, for folks like you and me, we're always going to be, the hardcore fans are always going to care, always going to show up. But man, it's sickening to sit back and watch what's happened to our sport, man.
And before I respond to that, when you talk about the complexity of this model, that's another thing that drives people away. And I'm not saying that this should be a major consideration, but when people look at the rankings, when you're a fringe college football fan, they want to be able to look at the rankings and say, okay, I know what teams are making the playoffs. Oh, the top 8, the top 12, the top 6. Oh, why is Boise State there? Why did they get kicked out? Oh, the Big Ten has to have 4. Why they have to drop down to number 19 and grab Minnesota to make they're not going to know what's going on.
Yeah.
And that doesn't help the market, the sport, when people have to figure out what are they doing and who's playing who and why.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, man. Hopefully cooler heads will prevail at some point. And at the end of the day, Mark, it's all comes down to one thing, and it's all been about money, man. It's money has ruined college football. I shouldn't say it's ruined. It hasn't ruined it.
Yeah,
it's still fun.
Yeah,
but it's definitely watered it down and made it a little less fun than probably what it used to be.
Yeah. Well, my channel, 6, 7, 8 years ago during the off season was quarterback ratings and schedule breakdowns and all-time rankings and looking at historic stuff and previewing this and that. And all of that, that's what it was. But I do recall, and before I give you the final word, Justin, as soon as you say that, it brings me to producing I think it was a live stream video, whatever it was at the time, when Johnny Manziel was caught signing autographs. And he was suspended for the first half of the first game in the 2013 season. And it's really the first time anybody started mentioning name, image, likeness. Remember, I posted a long video about this, and I'm like, they need to address this. This is going to become a problem.
Yep. You were right.
That was in 2013.
Yeah. Crazy.
Well, Justin, good to see you, man.
Yeah, good to see you. Glad to come on with you, Mark. It's been
absolutely fun. You're always welcome, and we want to encourage everyone to check out Justin's channel there, Coos's Corner. It's right here on YouTube.
If you get the desire to learn more about the West Virginia Mountaineers, I'm your guy.
We'll have you back sometime before the season to talk Big 12 and WVU.
Yep. All right, Mark. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Coos. Appreciate it, man. One of the great guys in the landscape right there. Justin Walker, Coos's Corner. Check it out. All right. I hate this box configuration, but we'll go with that. I love the book, though. And you guys do, too. Don't take my word for it. We have nothing but positive feedback on the book. So we appreciate all of you leaving great comments on the Disputed National Champions book. You can pick it up at Amazon. Disputed National Champions, 1990s historical reset, but it's not just a history book, folks. We project all of this toward the future. So check it out. Also, we've got our Big Ten guy, Genetics 56, Big Ten information, college football fan. He will be familiar and recognizable to many of you. He basically is just a wealth of insight and information concerning this landscape. That's our page there at the Voice of College Football. So check us out on X/Twitter. And don't know if I want to show you my messages. Let's go back and do this. So yes, many of you will be familiar with Big Ten information on Twitter/X. Amazon links in the description section of all the videos. When you shop on Amazon, please use the link that we provide. We also have a watch party coming up. Buckeye fans, you can brave it. You can do it. You can show your mettle. You can show your toughness. You can show your resilience. And Michigan fans, you can gloat and cheer and do whatever you want. Yeah, I got to figure out a day and time. Still working on that. 2021 Michigan Ohio State watch party, but that's going to be our first watch party. So the goal here is a watch party of recent vintage games. That might be an oxymoron. Instant classics, recent classics. And that was the first selected by you. 2021 Michigan beats Ohio State to break the long drought and get Michigan to the playoff in the Big Ten Championship in 2021 at the Big House. And so during the offseason, we're going to look at classic games and form some watch parties for members only. It's easy to become a member here at the Voice of College Football. Either go to Patreon or stay right here on YouTube and become a member, and you will have access to our watch parties. But during the season, we'll have to see what kind of response we get. But what I'm contemplating here would be watch parties on Monday nights. We take the best game of the weekend, we do a watch party. What do you think about that? I'll have to take some kind of poll. The issue I run into with these polls is everyone says, yay, yeah, let's do it. And then it doesn't necessarily transpire that way. But yeah, possibly a watch party coming up every Monday. If not, we'll do it at least once per month during the season. But I just, man, as soon as I thought of that, it's not necessarily a revolutionary idea, but I thought coming off a big college football weekend, and then on Monday, boom. Now, of course, the first weekend of the season, there's college football on Monday night. So we will not do that for the first weekend. Maybe we'll do it on Tuesday night. Imagine an Ohio State-Texas rewatch party after the first weekend, or LSU-Clemson, or whomever, Miami-Notre Dame. We shall see how that flies. All right. I'm going to leave the link in the chat. Give me a ring. And we are awaiting our next guest at 6:30 Eastern. Got a very sensitive new laptop here. And I have to hit the mouse pad like perfectly in the corner here to get it to operate. Otherwise, it does the right hand drop down. Very sensitive. I said yesterday that we were going to start a little talking point where we would go through maybe one team per day and do our random team of the day. Not prepared to do that today. I was wrestling around with StreamYard this afternoon and also had some errands to run. So not prepared to do that today, but I think we'll pick a random team maybe on Friday and we'll chop it up. Okay, who's going to be our first random team of the day? First random team, what I would consider a random team, is going to be a team that did not finish in the top 25 last year. Give me a random team. First person that selects a random team, we're going to talk about that team. We're going to do a little breakdown starting on Friday. Also on Friday, keep in mind that we did not get to our On the Move show. Leanne was not feeling well on Wednesday night. She is better. That is, of course, great news. Therefore, we're getting together. It's on Wednesday night, but this week, On the Move on Friday night, our recruiting and transfer portal update live show with Leanne Herring and myself, Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. So on Friday, you'll see me here at 4 for however long. You'll see Leanne and myself at 8 p.m. Eastern time on Friday night. The call-in line is in the chat if you want to give me a call concerning college football. The audio from this show and all the live streams here at the Voice of College Football available on your favorite audio platform, Amazon, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio as well. And I believe we've got a winner. Oregon State. West Virginia had a shot. Wisconsin had a shot. But it is Oregon State. So on Friday's show, we will talk some Oregon State football. Whatever that entails. We'll look at the schedule. We'll look at the starting quarterback. We've got a new coach there at Oregon State. All sorts of new stuff going on at Oregon State. We do not have a new coach. I was thinking Washington State, losing Jake Dicker to Wake Forest. Oregon State, Trent Bray, the former linebacking great at Oregon State, in his second year after going 5-7 this past year. And of course, they are one of the refugees from the Pac-12 conference. Oregon State. You can follow me on X. You can follow the Voice of College Football on X as well. Believe me, I do not suggest or promote that you follow us or that you make and create an X account. But if you do, please join us at the Voice of College Football. And our Instagram. I would promote and show you the Instagram if I was able to log in on this laptop. I cannot. It's only on my phone. But Patrick and Gabe, our two Instagram gurus, are doing an exceptional job. Check us out on Instagram. I cannot promote that thing enough. They're doing a great, great job. So Instagram is going places for the Voice of College Football. And if you have any interest at all, you can also follow me. Let's see if I can find my handle. You can follow me. Now, you're going to get college football when you follow me on Twitter /X. But I'll certainly have some other things to say about other topics as well. Doreen in particular, thank you so much for reposting all the time. She reposted this link to ensure that other people knew that we were here this afternoon. So Doreen, thank you so much for that. Big Buckeyes fan and supporter here at the Voice of College Football. Doreen is one of these people that just fascinates me in regards to how in the world does she get to all these places and all these things. And it seems like she's got this super active life, but she still is throwing links all over the place and seems to hear and know everything that's going on out there. It's amazing. It's like Jackson. Moose, I don't have that link yet. Are we talking about the link to the watch party? That link has not been created. So we don't have the link to the watch party. I got to figure out when the watch party for Michigan, Ohio State is. But let's see. What are we looking at? Somebody call and keep me company for the next 40 minutes. We've got our next guest coming up at 6:30 Eastern. And maybe we'll do our Oregon State. I'll cheat. I'm going to cheat on Oregon State. Since we had Mike recommend Oregon State, then what the heck? I picked up a Lindy's today. And so we'll see what Lindy's says about the Beavs. If I can find them in here. So, yes, I'm cheating. This is not my knowledge on Oregon State football. I pretty much gave it to you. Head coach, and I'm sure I will recognize the quarterback's name as soon as I see it. Where in the world is Oregon State in this magazine? Shoot, they may not even have Oregon State in here. Yeah, they do. They've got got my favorite, Coastal Carolina. Still trying to decide who my favorite team's going to be this fall. Coastal Carolina is in the lead right now, but they have not completely grabbed my heart. Let's see, where did they throw? They're in the Mountain West. Oh, they should be right here. They're kind of in the Mountain West. They're in their own conference right now. But I would assume that they placed them. Man, you would have to pick Oregon State, right? Can't even find them. Okay, maybe we'll put Oregon State on the back burner. We're going to go with the second choice. Who was the second choice there? West Virginia. We already talked West Virginia. Let's go with Wisconsin. Wisconsin, Luke Fickell. 7-6, 5-7. Luke Fickell at Wisconsin. I expected him to do much better than that. To their credit, for as lousy as the season was last year, they did take Oregon to the wire. They played Penn State extremely well. And at one point in the season, they were 5-2, I believe, was Wisconsin, before they tanked. Of course, they had Tyler Van Dyke at quarterback. He is transferred to SMU. He got injured against Alabama. They finished out the season with Braden Locke. And now they enter this season with Danny O'Neal. He's the San Diego State transfer. But the starting quarterback is going to be Billy Edwards from Maryland. See if I can find anything on Wisconsin. Lindy's has Wisconsin at number 55 in the country. And the Wisconsin schedule looks like this. Wisconsin better win their opener against Miami of Ohio. And that's not necessarily a give me. Trip to Tuscaloosa in week 3 after Middle Tennessee State. In terms of the Big Ten schedule, Wisconsin, I'm looking at Iowa. Wisconsin travels to Michigan and Oregon and Indiana and Minnesota. They play most of the difficult teams in the Big Ten. They've got Ohio State, Illinois, Iowa. In terms of the expected bottom feeders in the Big Ten, Wisconsin's got a date against Maryland at home to open Big Ten play on September 20th. You see it right there. And they play, really, that's the only definite, or Maryland's not even definitely bad. But it's a difficult schedule for Wisconsin. My goodness. After they play Maryland, they could easily go on a 4-game losing streak, going to Michigan, Iowa, Ohio State, at Oregon. Could be 1-4 in the Big Ten right out of the gate. And they finish Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, and 2 of those 3 are on the road. Wisconsin's probably going to go 3-6 in the Big Ten. And 2-7 isn't necessarily out of the question. Okay, this is according to Lindy's. Players to watch, quarterback Billy Edwards. We talked about him from Maryland. You got Darian Dupree, the running back. Also, Cade Yakimelli, Vinny Anthony at wide receiver, Corey Walker on the edge. For the 3rd consecutive season, Wisconsin will start to transfer at quarterback. Badgers and new offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes will turn to Maryland transfer Billy Edwards. So Grimes has been at Kansas, Baylor, and BYU as offensive coordinator, marks a shift toward the Badgers' ground game roots after Coach Luke Fickell fired Phil Longo. Terps' number 1 quarterback last year, Edwards completed 65%, 15 touchdowns, 9 picks, 13 rushing touchdowns career, primarily in short yardage situations. Darian Dupree and Cade Yakimelli They ran for 317 and 274 yards, respectively, with Yakimelli ripping off 8.3 yards per attempt. I'm assuming those are against bad teams. Wide receiver Vinny Anthony will try to build off his 672 yards, 39 catches a season ago. Jaden Ballard, Ohio State transfer. Also, you've got Tarek Kekahuna, played in 12 games as a freshman. The offensive line is a veteran group featuring returning starters Joe Bruner, Jake Renfro, and Riley Mahlman. Remember when the Wisconsin offensive line was always one of the nation's best? That's not the case now. Not the case now. This schedule does not look good for Wisconsin. Defense. Man, what happened to Wisconsin football? Well, for one thing, Paul Chryst got a little lazy on the recruiting trail. And Wisconsin didn't like that, and they gave Jim Leonard a shot. And they obviously, I don't know that they weren't impressed with Jim Leonard, who I believe took over a 3-2 football team, and they finished 9-4. They beat Oklahoma State in a bowl game. Finished 9-4 under Jim Leonard. And if Luke Fickell would not have been on the market, or not that he was on the market, that he did not have a job, but he was obviously available. I don't know if Luke Fickell had not been there, that they would not have retained Jim Leonard. And it wasn't like Wisconsin was at its pinnacle at that point, coming off a 9-4 season, but they were still strong. They were still strong, but a lot of bad reports about Paul Chryst last few years of recruiting, and it's really not reflected in the recruiting rankings, but that the recruiting fell off drastically, and the effort in recruiting fell off drastically under Paul Chryst. And man, this program, I know Florida State's coming off a 2-10 year last year, but they won 13 games the year before. Who else has taken a free fall like Wisconsin in the last 4 or 5 years? Stanford, of course, but that's now going back. That's been established for a while, that Stanford has been awful. You know, the Stanford teams of 2015, 16, 17, Christian McCaffrey going to Rose Bowls, and then after that, 9-4 kind of seasons. That ended in 2018. But Wisconsin, as of 2022, was still a pretty rock-solid program, at least on the surface. But man, I think that, Michigan State's getting a vote from Immaculate. I see some talk in the chat about Georgia Tech joining the Big Ten. Shoot, I've got videos about that are like 3 years old. On the defensive side, Mike Tressel has worked alongside Fickell as a defensive coordinator for 4 years, going back to Cincinnati. The Badgers slipped last year in scoring and rushing defense, looked to rebound behind several new faces up front. They got an edge rusher, Corey Walker from Western Michigan, where he racked up 5.5 sacks. Inside, they've got Parker Peterson. He played a central role on a two-lane defense that ranked number 23 nationally in points allowed. Mason Rieger arrives by the way of Louisville. He had 5 sacks for the Cardinals last year. Christian Allegro made just 3 official starts, but still finished second on the team with 66 tackles. He's back for Wisconsin. Defensive backs featuring 3 returning starters, a stingy unit, including Preston Zachman and all Big Ten honoree Ricardo Hallman, who led the Big Ten in interceptions. Wisconsin's kicker is back, but he didn't have a great season. 12 of 19. Fickell trying to find his footing after going 12-13 his first 2 years. Last year's 5-win total ended a 22-year bowl streak. And again, this is just not a good look. It's just not a good trajectory. And there just does not seem to be much of anything that's really causing anyone to get excited about Wisconsin or see them getting out of the woods. They were 108th in the country in scoring offense last year. That figures usually 60th, 70th. They were number 47 in scoring defense last year. That figures usually top 5 to 15 in the country. And they were -6 in turnover margin. That was 105th in the country. Yeah, they're going to win 2 or 3 games in the Big Ten. I don't see the additions that are going to change who they've been the last couple of years. And the schedule is pretty brutal. Minus missing Penn State. The Amazon links in the description section of all the videos. Folks, when you shop on Amazon, please use the link that we provide. Got Genetics 56 of X/Twitter fame upcoming at 6:30 Eastern. I'm going to have to check with our Oklahoma guy, Josh Mailer. I believe I'm stopping by the Oklahoma show tonight. Bold statement coming in from Peanut 3844. 6th ring incoming for the Canes. Maybe on the way, that would be a first ring in the ACC. A first ring in the ACC. Let's focus on that. 1 ring in the ACC. Get us a ring in the ACC for Miami. This is a pretty good line here out of Jim R. Hearing taps in Cheese Country by October. Got a few people in the chat that are rooting for Michigan State to do something this year, to come back to some level of relevance. I'm okay with that. Moose thinks it's going to be a national championship year for Michigan. When is the last time a Big Ten team went to Alabama? Would love to know that. I would love to know that. I can't think of any. Penn State went there, but they were not. Wait a minute. Yeah, Penn State went there about 12 or 13 years ago. One of Joe Paterno's last teams, they played home and home against Alabama, and they went to Tuscaloosa in about 2011, 10 or 11. Penn State went to Alabama, and now Wisconsin is. And these kind of games should not be this rare in this sport. It doesn't make any sense. It should not be this way. Ohio State's never been to Alabama. Michigan's never been to Alabama. Those teams have never hosted Alabama. Penn State, Wisconsin. Wisconsin's been, to their credit, a bit creative with their schedule. They played LSU a home and home at 2 NFL stadiums. This home and home with Bama. this might as well lead us right into week 1. There you go, Gregory. Thank you so much for that one. That would be the 2012 season opener, Michigan in Dallas against Bama. And as a Michigan fan, I would think that you would want to forget that game. That was a complete mauling. Poor oh, good Lord, shoelaces. Denard Robinson was running for his life in that game. Immaculate in running the playoff models of the 16-team field over the college football playoff era. I gotta say that I ran into a couple Alabama-Oregon matchups, and that would have been just spectacular. I think Alabama would have trucked them, but still, like when Oregon ran into Ohio State, when they ran into LSU during those Chip Kelly years, but still, because of what Oregon was able to do under Chip Kelly and because of their high-powered offenses and their skill players, it just would have been fascinating to see in that small window of time when Chip Kelly was at Oregon and Jim Harbaugh at Stanford, and then the David Shaw teams right after that. During that short period of time, we never really got to see Oregon and Stanford match up against the SEC. Oregon played in the Rose Bowl against Ohio State, and they later, at the end of the Chip Kelly era, I know it was Helfrich on the sideline, but that was basically Chip Kelly's team that played Ohio State in the national championship game. And in between those two games, they played Kansas State in a Fiesta Bowl. They played Michigan, or not Michigan. They did. They played Michigan State home and home. They got after Michigan State, two really good Michigan State teams, Connor Cook teams. Oregon played Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl. Russell Wilson. And, of course, the national championship game against Cam Newton. So they did play the SEC in that game, and that was a great game. But we never saw Alabama, Oregon, or Alabama, Stanford. Those are some of the missing games from that era. We missed that matchup. When in doubt, and keep in mind that I've left the link in the chat if you want to give me a call. But when in doubt, we go to week 1. And over the past week or so, some more kickoffs have been announced, kickoff times. Week 0, I love it. Iowa State, Kansas State. They played the final game of the regular season in the snow, and Iowa State beat Kansas State to get to the Big 12 championship game. Fresno State and Kansas, sign me up for that one. That's not a bad game for a week 0 matchup. So we've got a bit of a triple header there with those two games. And then if you're really dying for football, Sam Houston State in Western Kentucky, but Stanford and Hawaii playing the primetime game on CBS. And your early line is Stanford by 2.5. And if you're only a 2.5 point favorite against the Rainbow Warriors, then you're probably in for a rough go. Frank Reich and Stanford at Hawaii, week 0. At least he gets a trip to Hawaii. Then we go to Thursday night. I was just telling somebody the other day that we do our 24-hour session here at the Voice of College Football. We have yet to decide whether we're going to start the season out as we have the past 4 or 5 years with a 24-hour marathon to start the season, but we'll see. 5:30 in the afternoon on Thursday. I love it. I love it. So we don't have to wait till 7 o'clock at night. We've got a 5:30 in the afternoon game from Tampa with Boise State and South Florida. Ohio and Rutgers on BTN a half hour later. East Carolina almost beat NC State last year. That's on the ACC network. Before we get to Buffalo, Minnesota later, and Nebraska, Cincinnati. So for the last several years, we've had not necessarily marquee matchups on Thursday night, but better matchups that somewhat excite people. Florida, Utah, Nebraska, Minnesota, Minnesota, North Carolina last year, Penn State, Purdue, Ohio State, Indiana. Those are the ones that come to mind. But this year, the biggest game is Cincinnati and Nebraska. That's what they're giving us on Thursday night. I don't totally understand that, why we couldn't have done better than that. I like the 9 o'clock game. Well, there's 2 9 o'clock games. So that's going to take us till 1 o'clock in the morning. So in my book, Boise State and South Florida is worth checking out, especially at 5:30 in the afternoon. I love that. We will be here at 4, and I will get off the air at 5:30 in the afternoon, unless you give me reason not to. 5:30 in the afternoon, I will be on my way to watch Boise State and South Florida and Ohio and Rutgers. On Friday, they have given us nothing. Well, Baylor, Auburn. I'm okay with that matchup. And Colorado, Georgia Tech. Okay, the Friday slate's not terrible. Friday slate is not terrible. And again, we've got an early game at 6. So you can sneak in some football. And this is a good move by CBS Sportsnet to try to get some viewers before everyone runs to the primetime games. Then if Army and Tarleton State is a decent game at that point, maybe they can hang on to a few viewers. Auburn, Baylor, Georgia Tech, Colorado. And then Saturday, we now have the complete schedule. So we know at noon that Ohio State and Texas are going to take away 90% of the eyeballs. I really like Tulane and Northwestern. That in some ways will be my second game. ESPN is pretty hard up at noon with Southern Miss hosting Mississippi State. Why is Mississippi State traveling to Southern Miss? I don't know. So that's the noon fare. And I usually have a big problem at noon because I've got about 6 games I want to watch. But this time we're looking at 3. Tennessee, Syracuse on ABC. Then the 3:30 window is, of course, going to be owned by Bama, Florida State. And the rest of these games are nothing. This 3:30 window on opening weekend is horrific. Horrific. It's a terrible slate of games. Terrible slate of games. Yeah, we've got one game at 3:30. I don't see any other games there that I care to watch. None. Then we slip into prime time, and I was playing Albany. Yikes. Virginia and Coastal Carolina. I'm intrigued. I'll keep an eye on that one. And then, of course, LSU and Clemson are playing in prime time. And I think we're all about that. All of us that love college football. That's got to be the number one game. Of course it is, but I mean that there's not even a game that's a second place game. Like the rest of the games, just like 3:30, are terrible. Terrible. That's the ABC game. And the NBC game is Michigan, New Mexico. Yeah. 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 The rest of the slate, until we get to a couple sneaky good games, or at least nice little matchups there with Cal going to Oregon State on ESPN and Utah and UCLA. That's on Fox at 11 p.m. Eastern Time. And then we finish up the weekend, of course. I love 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Sunday. How about that? I don't recall, except for a Northwestern Rutgers game on Sunday afternoon, us getting a Sunday afternoon game. Sure it's happened. But I do remember after COVID, and I think it was the first CBS game, was Rutgers and Northwestern on Sunday. But Virginia Tech, South Carolina, looking forward to that. Of course, Notre Dame, Miami could be the game of the weekend. Could be. And Bill Belichick gets his debut on ESPN against TCU on Monday night. So entertainment all over the place. I've got nothing but good things to say about that entire extended Labor Day weekend. I've got issues with Saturday, but that's a fine Sunday and Monday. In week 2, the NFL takes over, so we've got no Thursday games. College football couldn't at least say, you know what, the NFL is going to kick off at 8:30. Let's kick off a game at 6 on Thursday. That's what they should have done. That's what they should do. If I was the commissioner, I'd say we're going to play a Thursday game, but it's going to be early for people on the East Coast that can get home at 5:30 in the afternoon. They're going to be able to watch, or with the amount of people that work at home now, that we're going to kick off a game before the NFL game. But college football is just completely run scared away from the NFL, and they will not throw up a Thursday game on opening weekend at least. So on Friday, Yeah. Maybe James Madison could put up a fight against Louisville. Maybe. And then if these two Big Ten games turn out to be somewhat competitive, that's just because Northwestern and Maryland might be that bad. So that's nothing great. On Saturday, we've got these games. What stands out? Illinois Duke at noon, Virginia NC State, Baylor SMU. Not horrible, not bad. So SMU out of the ACC playing Baylor. It's a little non-conference tilt. Ole Miss looking to get some revenge on Kentucky on ABC. That's the 3:30 window, which is much better than the week before, even with just Kentucky, Ole Miss, and Kansas, Missouri. And yeah, that's it. And it's still better than the week before. There's a possibility Oklahoma State could give Oregon a game, maybe. Clemson hosting Troy. And the rest of the 3:30 games are a washout. Then we get to the evening games, and we've got nothing. 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 Then we've got, finally, Michigan at Oklahoma. And Michigan State, Boston College, decent. Mississippi State at home against Arizona State, possibly. And what's the ESPN game? ESPN's got a late game with Stanford BYU. And UCLA is going to have to watch it. They've got Utah to open. Then they've got UNLV on the road with Dan Mullen. UCLA could be one of those early season teams with a few unexpected losses right out of the gate. That is a possibility. Well, we do appreciate you all being here at the Voice of College Football. We are going to continue our show. And we've got one of our favorite people on Twitter/X stopping by to lay down some intel for us. We got Big Ten information. Sir, we appreciate you being here.
Hey there, how are you doing today?
Doing just fine. Always a pleasure to have you. Always to get the intel that you've been gathering about the landscape of college football.
Yes, most definitely. We'll be going over quite a few topics this evening, so I don't want to get started too early because I told everybody 5:30, so we still got 4 minutes and we can just chit-chat for a few minutes.
Hey, that sounds good. Is there anything in particular, we'll go on the field since we're going to talk so much off the field, that intrigues you about the off season that has caught your attention?
Yeah, so I'm extremely interested to see if Ohio State can reclaim their ability to make it to the national title game, because they're going to have a new quarterback, obviously, as we all know, and they have to play Texas right out of the gate. So that's going to be a very good test. So how quickly can the quarterback grow up during fall camp? That's going to be extremely important in order to win that Texas game. And then how does the offense come together over the course of the season? They don't have too difficult of a conference schedule compared to a Wisconsin, which is very grueling throughout the entire conference schedule. So if they can grow leaps and bounds from the Texas game, however that will go, through the other non-conference games to the conference competition, can they make it to the conference title game? And then based off the season results, who are they going to be matched up with in the college football playoff? Because we would all be surprised if Ohio State did not make it to the playoff. So we'll see how that goes. Penn State is my pick to win the national title, which can be a little bit nerve-wracking because they do have a history of the last number of years of struggling to beat top 5, top 10 ranked teams. So I am concerned about that, but I still like their team. Experienced quarterback. They still have some very good playmakers on the defensive line. They have the best combo of running backs in the country this next season. They have an experienced offensive line. Can they get enough explosive plays, enough production through the wide receivers so they can stress the back end of the defense in order to force the defense into multiple different kind of coverages in order to try to cover their wide receivers so they don't have to just play one-on-one man and then put all of the defenders into the box to try to stop the run. So Ilar can definitely throw the ball a very long distance. He just needs to have that wide receiver or two to stretch that field in order to get those running backs to have those lanes open in the front seven of the defense. So the offensive line has improved dramatically over the last couple of years or so. So the offensive line is able to get to the second level with the ability to stretch that defense through wide receiver play, and Ilar being able to hit those deep passes, being able to make some important scrambles with the running game, with that very good sound defensive line in order to make plays. They have a good linebacker core. It's not very deep, but they have a very good linebacker core back, and they have a very solid team, and it's deep. So I'm very excited about what Penn State can do this coming football season. So we will see how it goes.
Yeah, with all but one of their two deep on the offensive line coming back, 9 of 10 there. And as you mentioned, Aller gets a lot of criticism, but he is the most accomplished quarterback in the league, if not the nation, coming into this season. And the combination at running back, and they're always just so athletic on defense. They are going to be on paper. I think they're the best team in the Big Ten. But yes, to your point, can Ohio State grow up enough? Can they just maybe hold to one loss until they mature enough late in the season? So is there one team in the Big Ten that's a bit under the radar that you like as a potential sleeper?
Illinois, they're underrated on a national scale. They have pretty much their entire team back. My concern is, are they going to still produce at the same level as they did last season? If they can, they're in the playoff. It's probably, I think it's one of the top 5 most experienced rosters coming back next season. I think it is. It's definitely at the top of the Big Ten. So we'll see. I'm definitely excited that it's media days next month. So July 8th and the 9th, the Big 12 has their media days. So
yeah,
we're going to start getting some football-based information and media coverage instead of all the other topics that have been dominating the media landscape. So in college anyways.
Well, speaking of which, again, everyone, we appreciate Genetics 56. You can catch him on Twitter/X with tons of meaningful intel and information and insight. He's got a ton of connections and resources out there. And so we will be showing you his X page and have throughout the show already. But sir, we appreciate you being here. So we'll start with this house settlement, and I don't want to box you into a corner of taking this in whatever direction you think it needs to go. But obviously the numbers are out there, the $20.5 million for the athletes, the $2.8 billion for the athletes of the past 10 years. And we know the breakdown of generally what the sports bring in revenue wise that should translate to that $20.5 million, roughly a 75% figure for football, even though that's not going to be tied directly to what the revenue share possibly should be. So is there any leans that you have of things that are being talked about or communicated that aren't necessarily that seem to be somewhat false narratives that you can probably bring some clarity to help us gain a better understanding of where all this could be headed?
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 that I can definitely help you all out with. One of them's terminology. At the beginning of this, when the news broke through Ross Dillinger for a membership agreement, it's not a membership agreement. So the new entity that's going to be overseeing NIL and the governance and the punishments for any rule breaking, that is the organization that developed this document. But it's not a membership agreement, it's a participation agreement. So people are using the wrong terminology for this. What they are doing is signing a document that they are participating in the ruled governance, and they are okaying from a language perspective that they will receive the punishments, and they forego the ability to sue based off on the university side against the new entity or anybody else if they are caught breaking a rule. So this is in an attempt to try to bring more stability within college athletics as a whole, all the way through FBS from the non-basketball and basketball conferences. So we'll see how that goes. And one of the other things I would like to mention, just going through my notes here, is really just the understanding of how this new scholarship works in its relationship to the revenue share dollar value. So everybody knows the 20.5 million. That's straightforward. That's just a line item, dollar amount. So the new scholarships for baseball, as an example, that counts against that 20.5 million if you add a new scholarship, and that goes up to 2.5 million. So a school may only have 19 million, 18 million dollars to work with. So the new scholarships that has a cap value of $2.5 million. So the lowest that it will go is $18 million available if you're hitting that 2.5 million mark. So a school could have a desire to not share any revenue. They could share $20.5 million for one sport. And if a school is adding scholarships, they could have it anywhere from one scholarship to all of the scholarships until that 2.5 million mark. So when everybody is saying a school has the option of 20.5 million, yes, that's true. But in order to properly understand how much dollars can be spent through revenue share for each given school, you got to understand and know how many new scholarships is that specific university bringing into their athletic department that will count against the cap. So that is where the actual research and understanding of how one school can compare to another through this whole revenue share era.
So correct me if I'm wrong. All the schools in the Big Ten, the SEC, and the Big 12 have announced that they will be spending the $20.5 million, and it's all but certain that the ACC will follow suit. And then I heard a commitment of $10 million that the American Conference is asking out of its schools for 3 years.
Yeah, depends on how they want to organize it. Because the conference can mandate specific things, and they can also just have everything done at the school level. For example, one thing that is never talked about because nobody knows about it because nobody's reported it, in the Southeastern Conference, they were going to try to mandate how much money could be spent for each sport at the university level. But the Kentucky's basketball program, the men's, and the women's South Carolina basketball program pushed back against that concept. So the Southeastern Conference was going to be the only A4 conference to mandate a specific spend amount per sport. But thankfully that didn't happen because I don't think that would have gone over too well.
All right. We got Genetics 56 from X and Twitter fame, Big Ten information, college football fan with a ton of information. If you follow him on social media, you know what I'm talking about. So will these schools strictly go with a revenue split of that $20.5 million based on the revenue that's brought in per sport, or do we expect some portion of it to go to non-revenue sports, just as whether it's Title IX driven or otherwise?
Yeah, the way that I understood it from talking to people in athletics is list down what's important from a sport perspective for each school. So, for example, in the state of Nebraska, what's most important? Well, it's going to be volleyball and football. In Oklahoma, gymnastics is more important than it is at Nebraska, for an example. So, a school like Nebraska may spend all of their money, or at least 95% of it, on football, volleyball, and basketball. Then they may give 5% to wrestling or another sport. So, in the Penn State, for example, based off of previous reporting, their AD plans on spending revenue share dollars on wrestling with volleyball and football. So you just have to know what each school wants to do. Because there's nothing, I don't know the word to use. It's school A, school B, school C, school D, E, F, G, keep going on. They're all going to do it differently. They're all going to have different dollars to spend. They're going to organize everything differently. And I'll talk a little bit more about how some of this stuff is going to work here in a second too.
Okay, so before we get to that, I'm fascinated with, and I don't even know that we're going to see the numbers past the distribution to the individual sports, would be the distribution on a football roster of how a particular school is going to determine the worth of these football players.
Yes. A lot of NFL analysis is being done in these athletic departments to figure out how does the NFL do it. So the NFL, it's very complex. They'll have a dollar value based off of a position, years of experience, production, all of that. So that's all calculated out. And they have everything listed for a quarterback, running back, left tackle, right guard, center, years of experience, a dollar value, they're a rookie, whether it's a first contract, a second contract. So everything is scaled based off of a specific formula that they use at the NFL level. So what some of these colleges will need to do for the football programs is figure out, okay, we have 85 scholarships. We can go up to 105. Should we go past 85? What dollar value should we share for the football program, whether it's 14 million, 16 million, 18 million, or to 20.5 million, and then figuring out how do we organize the roster from a payout perspective based off of their grade level, starters, bonuses, bench players, and their incoming recruiting class, as well as the transfer portal, because in order to land a recruit going forward, you're going to have that spend available to get that talented individual into the program. So the talent acquisition cost associated to everything. So one thing that I learned within the past couple of days is what's termed backloaded contracts, because people are going to make numerous amount of mistakes. So as we know, there's a 4% escalator. So this first year of 20.5 million spend that starts in July 1st, well, they may make mistakes. Well, they can correct that through that 4% escalator. So it's a little bit over $1 million of new spend that they can do in revenue share the following year. So they can course correct anything that they do incorrectly in that first year. And then through the next 10 years, it's roughly $1 million, 1.2 million, $1.3 million that's added on again for the next year's new revenue share dollar value. And that's going to allow these schools to get very creative and manipulate these contracts for an incoming freshman, a sophomore, and backload those contracts in order to try to keep these talented players in their roster by backloading their contracts. So whatever dollar value a freshman may get, let's just throw out $50,000 as an example. Well, if you become a starter in 2 years, we're going to plan to spend $150,000 on you through revenue share. But if you leave, you're not going to get that money, obviously, because you enter the transfer portal, and then the termination clause of what's written in there from a language perspective will come into play. So it's going to be quite interesting how every school does things differently and who ends up being the smartest ones at this from a revenue share payout perspective. And then obviously the NIL aspects of things will go on top of that. Every deal has to go through Deloitte for a ROC evaluation, no matter who the organization is that's giving out the money. And one of the things that some people are having conversations about is how do we funnel this money like we currently are now to pass through that Deloitte? And there's two things: give the money directly to the school and let them do it. And what that means is sign NIL deals. Or go directly to a business. Here's $200,000. Here's the recruit that we want signed to an NIL deal. Go assign them to an NIL deal. Obviously, it'll need to be a real contract. And there will need to be obligations, unlike now. So that is just some of the things that I've been learning about what people are talking about, what they're game planning to do, and how to analyze everything. So one of the other things that I was told is the importance of the audit for the revenue share cap. That's a very painful process to go through. So when the new guy that was hired that will run the new entity, it was mentioned very clearly that he has experience going into investigations of people and professional teams that have violated that cap at the professional level in the Major League Baseball, etc. He has experience doing that. So that's going to be very valuable to try to find a cheater, because the way that the data is going to be entered is there's 2 people per campus that are going to be designated to enter this data manually, which I can very easily see trying somebody to try to cheat their way into spending more money than they're actually allowed to by manipulating what gets entered into that LBI. So we'll see how that goes.
Fascinating. So you started to touch upon NIL. Before we get to that, I want to put the close on the salary distribution, because I'm going to bring up a strategy that's not going to fly, because it's just not going to fly, because obviously these players in any sport are paid as the season unfolds, and that is determined before the season starts. But the most accurate way would be to actually let them play the season and then determine their worth at the conclusion of the season, because it's all projection about how good they're going to be. And obviously there's going to be busts and there's going to be breakout players. And you're saying there's a 4%, which is roughly, like you say, $1 million of buffer moving forward, which to me doesn't sound like much to try to course correct.
It's not much, no.
Okay. When we see this clearinghouse, and I read some figures that projected that the current public collectives that are putting together NIL deals are doing those pretty above board, to the point where about 90% of those would clear this clearinghouse, but only about 30% from these multi-millionaire boosters. That there's going to have to be some validation of the reciprocation of these NIL deals from the athletes.
Yeah. I really don't have a whole much to say on that part of things. Yeah.
All righty. So in terms of, another category in all of this that you wanted to hit on.
Yeah, there's quite a few categories that I am going to cover today. So one of the things that I wanted to cover, I'll get into that Florida State and ACC conference realignment stuff here in a few minutes.
Yes.
But I wanted to get into something that's more prevalent, more relevant to actual today's stuff that's going on. So there's going to be some changes potentially, because the Tony Petitti and other folks at the Big Ten office are communicating with Fox Sports to make some changes for the Big Ten TV contract.
Yep.
Obviously, what's written in the contract is what's written in the contract. But what they are wanting to do is have more flexibility and do some capping. And what that means is they're wanting to allow the schools to pick a game for a specific day and time. So what it's all about is have the ability to pick a specific day and time. So, for example, Penn State has been griping that they haven't had the ability to do a whiteout game against a big-time opponent at night. Well, that would be a designated NBC game, 6:30 p.m. Central Time, against whoever they choose to play in that whiteout game against. This year, obviously, it's going to be Oregon, but next year's schedule, whoever Penn State picks to be that whiteout game, they'll have that capability, hopefully, if they all agree on things, that Penn State will be able to pick a specific game for a specific day, time, and everybody else in the conference will have that option as well. So that's a change that could be coming. And then they're talking about trying to cap the number of games that you play on a specific network at a specific time. So this will help solve that Ohio State bitching that they are always doing while having to play at the noon time, Eastern time for big noon. Well, if they cap that, for example, 4 appearances, 5 appearances, 3 appearances, well, then Fox is going to have to be very smart about what are the 3 appearances that we want to have with Ohio State on big noon. So that's going to allow more flexibility for all of the TV networks to try to get better games spread throughout the 3 networks instead of Ohio State always being picked as the big noon game because they're the one. Well, they are the biggest TV draw in all of America football because they get the most watch time by far against anybody else in college football. Nobody else is close. So we'll see how all that goes from that new contract negotiation stuff.
So, like you said off the top there, a contract is a contract. And obviously, I'm sure Fox wants to stay in good standing with their television partner, but they select the games based on the return. They're not selecting the best games. They're selecting the best TV draws, as you well know.
Yep.
That's why we see Ohio State playing MAC schools. They had one ridiculous matchup maybe 2 years ago on a big noon kickoff because they're just looking for the best TV draws. Therefore, if they're going to Fox, meaning going to respond to these complaints and compromise their selections, I would think that would also compromise the contract just slightly, even if they said, this is going to affect our income by a couple percent.
Potentially, yeah. It would really depend on what kind of matchups that they are able to do. Because Fox Sports does have the highest rated ad revenue game in all of college football. So if they lose quality matchups, then their ad rate will drop the following season. So that's just something that they'll have to. Obviously, Fox Sports knows what they're doing. So that's just stuff that they're talking about. We'll see.
So as we move to this ACC situation, and obviously the most recent concrete news that gives us indication of what could transpire in the future is, of course, this 60-40 revenue split that the ACC announced going forward, where 60% of the media rights revenue comes in is going to be distributed based on television popularity, and the other 40% evenly distributed. I ran some numbers, posted some videos, threw those numbers by you and a few other people I respect that thought they were, a fair estimate of how much that's going to change the numbers going forward for the teams in this conference. And then obviously that announcement came also with the buyout changes to teams looking to leave the conference. We know when the end of the contract is. Does all of this spell doom for the ACC, even though they put a Band-Aid on it for now?
No, not right now. There's literally no chatter out there that anybody is leaving tomorrow or in the next year or two. There's nothing out there that's indicating that. Because I spoke with Florida State's consultants. So a handful of months ago, I gained permission to speak with the consultants that work with Florida State. Obviously, I cannot say who that is, but I was able to learn about how does the consultant work with a university to determine when do they leave to a new conference, what conference do they join. So there's a whole complex analysis that the consultants will do. They'll figure out, well, is it profitable for that school to move to a specific conference? When should they move based off what's the cost associated with that specific move? So when I was talking to the consultants, and I've spoke with them a handful of times, 2027 is really going to be the earliest that you may hear something. Whether or not an announcement happens before 2027, who knows? But from a movement perspective, you're highly, highly unlikely to see anything before 2027. And it's more likely if a school ever decides to leave that it will be closer to 2030. And as far as appetite for the Southeastern Conference to add a new school, it's not there. They would prefer just to stay where they are. They're very comfortable in their space. They're a regional conference. They don't want to go west. They're not interested in adding just to add. So there has to be an additional value to the conference to add anybody more. They're interested in North Carolina. We know that, but that's pretty much it. There's no real desire of the Southeastern Conference to add anybody else besides North Carolina. And then for the Big Ten, I'm going to show some data here that I have access to.
Okay.
If I do my share screen correctly here in a second. So this is going to show us where are the Big Ten fans located that watch a Big Ten game every week, every season. And then I'm going to share some information about who are the schools in the ACC that are profitable for the Big Ten Conference. I can't show that data because I'm not allowed to show that data, but I can explain some of the numbers and give you some of the numbers, but I cannot show it publicly. So Florida State, first of all, nothing has really changed with them. They still have a landing spot, and they have ever since this whole lawsuit started. So you may recall a year or 2 years before that lawsuit was fired, Florida State wanted to get paid more. So they went into these spring meetings and other meetings to talk about their value and why they should get paid more. So that's why that whole eruption happened a couple of years ago or so, because it was very difficult for the other ACC schools to hear somebody that they're inside of a meeting with saying that they're worth more than you. We want to get paid more than you. Well, as we have seen here within the last couple of weeks or so, I think it is now, a few weeks, that the new revenue share finally got officially approved. Well, there was a meeting through the presidents the week after the athletic directors and everybody else met down there in Florida. Well, that's when the actual approval of the new revenue share was completed. So it was actually completed like 3 or 4 months before it finally came public. I don't know why it took forever for them to announce it, but the president signed off on it the following week after the ACC meetings to their athletic directors and et cetera. So when you're talking North Carolina, Virginia, Miami, Virginia Tech, NC State, North Carolina, don't expect anybody to announce. If anybody does, it would be a shock to absolutely everybody in athletics. Nobody's expecting anything. So that's where everything is at currently. So I'm going to share some data. So yeah, Florida State's in a good position. They have nothing to worry about. You either stay in the conference and make a lot more money than you did previously, or you leave to the Big Ten Conference and you're able to make more money. So that's how it is. So before I go over the Big Ten viewer information, I'm going to go over some other information first. The wife texted me, of course. All right. So there are 3 schools. Well, there's 2 AC schools and obviously Notre Dame that's profitable for the Big Ten. And from a viewership perspective, so what is the Big Ten median's viewership, and how does the ACC schools compare against that? Well, they have to be additive for the Big Ten median's TV viewership. So Clemson and Florida State are the only two ACC schools that were shown to be additive against the Big Ten median's TV viewership numbers, and that's 1.74 and 1.64. For the total values versus the Big Ten average, that I'm not allowed to give out. But the incremental value to the Big Ten's TV deal. So this basically tells us how many dollars are added to the Big Ten TV deal for each ACC school. And there's only 2 schools in the ACC that are additive for this figure. So Clemson would add $18 million to the Big Ten TV deal, and Florida State would add $33 million to the TV deal. Nobody else is additive. So that's how that data transpired. That's what the data is telling us for who can be additive to the Big Ten. It's Clemson and Florida State. That does not mean Clemson and Florida State are going to go to the Big Ten as a pair. It's just that that's what the data is telling us, who is profitable. So when you're analyzing who can go to the Big Ten, obviously Florida State's a target. It's a profitable addition. There's a lot of Big Ten viewers, as you can see here, that reside in the state of Florida already without Florida State being a Big Ten school. So in the state of Florida, you can see in line 5 here, with Florida State, there's 2 million persons that are added to the Big Ten's TV viewership every single week in the state of Florida by adding Florida State. So you can see the state of Florida without Miami or Florida State. It's below the state of Wisconsin, PA, as you would expect. So when you're talking about who can be added to the Big Ten Conference, if they decide to go to 19 and 20, well, it's going to be Florida State, obviously, number 1. Miami is not additive from a viewership perspective against the Big Ten TV's median, so their value did not come out to show profitability for the Big Ten. So if Miami ever had the opportunity to go to the Big Ten Conference, you're probably looking at 30, 40, 50% share. So is that going to be something that a school will want to do if they can make $60 million or $55 million with the new revenue share option in ACC? So that's why the consultants will do all of these calculations to try to figure out, is it worth a school leaving the ACC to go to a different conference based off of these new revenue share dollar figures that they do all these calculations around. So in short, you're not going to hear a whole lot in the next year, 2 years. 2027, you're probably looking at the earliest somebody may do something. If somebody decides to leave, you're probably looking at around 2030. But if the Big Ten gets their automatic qualifiers for the CFP, it's a possibility that a TV agreement for the Big Ten could get extended a handful of years in order to extract that new money through a scheduling agreement as well as the play-in games. So we'll see how everything goes for the CFP contracts and how that contract could get extended and how that could influence the decision-making for the ACC. Because if the value for the play-in games and a scheduling agreement, if that becomes reality, it becomes more expensive in order to become a school within the Big Ten Conference, because that value that the Fox Sports, NBC, and ABC are going to be paying out, or not ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox are going to be paying the Big Ten Conference, that is going to increase once again. So it's going to become more and more expensive, more difficult to become a member of the Big Ten if the automatic qualifiers happen.
Interesting. Okay. So again, as you just outlined for us, Clemson and Florida State are viable options for the Big Ten. They add value. Miami does not. If it would be a full 100% share, so then Miami has to make the determination: is it worth it to jump to the Big Ten for only a 30 to 50% initial share?
Correct. Yep.
And then if those three would, let's say North Carolina goes to the SEC, there's some combination of those four leaving the ACC. Do you see a world in which the ACC is depleted to that point where the next tier of schools, Louisville, NC State, Virginia Tech, those types are attractive for the Big 12?
Yeah,
And
probably
then,
not. Probably not.
no?
Because you have the new revenue share. That's not going to go away. That's in place throughout the entire remaining of the contract. Because I did get it confirmed that it does go through the remaining of the TV agreement. So that's up through 2036. So it's 2025 now. So then you have 10 years worth of TV value dollars that can get analyzed for your payout. So if Florida State and Clemson leave, as an example, well, Virginia Tech is going to move up the ladder. They're going to get paid more. So they're going to get paid more than what the Big 10, Big 12 conference will pay out their specific schools. So the Big 12 is, I believe, 35 or 34 million, something around there, that they're projected to pay out this next coming year. Well, they don't have any projections currently going above $50 million. Well, the top school in the ACC through the new revenue share is going to get roughly $65 million, $68 million in their payout. So if Florida State or Clemson left, Virginia Tech could become that school that could earn that $50 million, that $55 million, that $60 million. So why leave when you could become the big dog? Because the CFP contract is still going to be there. The A4 is not going to discontinue their relationship with the CFP LLC. So when that current CFP contract expires, during that next contract, Virginia Tech is still going to be there. They're still going to have access to it. The Big Ten and SEC are not going to go off and do their own thing for a playoff, because there's no need for that anymore. They threw that threat up there last February. You remember when I was talking about that?
Sure.
So that threat was already there and it's already gone. So that contract's already in place. They got their authority power to design the playoff the way that they want to do it. And that's all set. So there's no real need to rush anything right now.
And looking at the CFP, undoubtedly we'll get to 16 in 2026. The Big Ten.
Potentially. I'm going to talk about that here in a second.
Okay. Then we certainly can head in that direction, because we obviously have the 5+11 model that's been proposed, or at least thrown out by Greg Sankey, and then the 4-4-2-2-1-3 that seems to be supported by Tony Petiti.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the conversation, I need to be very careful so I don't leak anything that I'm not allowed to say. The conversations are quiet. Hopefully that's not saying too much. It's a bit quiet at the moment, because the Big Ten is still pushing for their 4-4-2-2-2-1-3. That's what they want. It's what they believe in. I believe the Ohio State athletic director talked about it today as well. I haven't read the articles about his presser yet today, but I believe I saw something on Twitter that he touched base on that. The Southeastern Conference was in agreement with the Big Ten to do the 4 AQs. So I got very upset last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever the SEC meetings transpired. I'm like, none of this bleep makes sense to me, because I knew the two conferences were aligned going into the SEC meetings. So then they start talking, they start bringing up this concept of a 5-11, which made absolutely no sense to me. So then I reached out to an individual that has done work with the Southeastern Conference. He's a consultant. This makes absolutely no sense to me. What's happening? Well, then he relayed back to me, well, they're in a trench mode right now. They're concerned about the enrollment cliff that is coming up. They're concerned about not upsetting their culture. So they don't want to change their culture. They want to keep their culture in place. So there's infighting for an 8 conference game versus a 9th conference game. Well, and from an Excel analysis, well, it makes complete sense to go to a 9th conference game. Why wouldn't you? You say you need new money coming in to help pay the bills in each athletic department. Oklahoma already cut some staff members, so why would you not go with the 9th conference game? So it made absolutely no sense to me. So then I got some newer information since the SEC meetings that yes, the Big Ten is still pushing for their AQs. They're willing to listen to the Southeastern Conference's view, I guess you can say, about 8th game versus 9th game, but there's no way that the Big Ten is going to want to sign off on a 5-11 format without a 9th conference game because of the inequality of the scheduling across college football. But what the Big Ten is having conversations about, should we do a 1-8 or a 1 versus 2? So that's actually not settled. I thought that was settled, but that's actually not settled. So they're trying to figure out to push the 4 winners. Do we do a 1 versus an 8, then a 2 versus a 7, etc.? Or do we still have the conference title game and do a 1 versus 2? So they're trying to have that conversation. Yes, the conference title game would be worth more from a 1 versus 2 matchup than it would be for a 1 versus 8 in a conference standing. But if you have a 7th and 8th team involved in the play-in, well, that is 2 more schools, 2 more fan bases that are going to be interested, 2 more stadiums that are going to be full through the month of November throughout the entire college football season. So there's more interest, there's more desire to invest from a university's perspective. So we'll see how the conversation's going. I do not expect a 5-11 to be the final answer because the Big Ten does not want that. So I don't expect it to actually happen. And quite frankly, I think the 5-11 is a complete disaster, in my opinion, because it's going to kill rivalries. It's going to kill non-conference quality matchups. There's a whole bunch of other things as well. So we'll see how these conversations going. I believe it's next week that their next meeting for the playoff is.
I had always heard the format would be a 1-6, or no, I'm sorry, a 3-6-4-5.
Yeah.
And
yep, that's if they do 1 versus 2 in the conference title game.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
And those would not just be another data point; they would be a true play-in game.
Yes. Yep.
Yep. And that would have involved Illinois and Iowa, I believe, last year.
Yeah, and I don't remember who the 7th and 8th teams were in the conference standings off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think he would have dropped it down to those teams were 6-3 in the conference. I don't know where we would have gone after that. USC and Washington, maybe. Minnesota 5-4. Yeah, would have been one of those teams at least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. So I'm going to move on to a couple of other topics here. There's a couple of important ones that are not stuff that people will be interested in, most likely, but there's still important information. So you may recall Conference USA making some news a handful of months ago. Well, they're down to their last handful of brands that they're talking to, so companies, to do their naming rights. So Conference USA may just go with the brand's name for their conference name, or they may go Conference USA Deloitte as an example. So they started out with 380 companies, which surprised me. 40 of those 380 they had conversations with, and they're now down to 5. And they're trying to get roughly $15 million in new revenue annually through the naming rights. So if they can land a $15 million annually, that's going to be $15 million in new money that they'll be able to pay out through their members. So they worked with Rev Entertainment. So that was that news from a handful of months ago, was they're signing with Rev Entertainment to do it. Well, now they're all the way down to the process of getting things finalized here. So hopefully it won't be too long before we hear about it.
Okay.
So Akron, they're in a very bad spot.
Yes.
So you may recall their APR score. Well, that's not even the worst thing that's going on right now. So if you Google Akron, the university, you'll see articles that talk about a 2022 $1 million budget shortfall. Well, they had a committee put together, which I just found out about yesterday, for the last 6 months that was analyzing where should the cuts come from. Well, one of the places that they are having conversations about where they may want to do the cuts is in the athletic department. So what's on the table for Akron is moving to a non-scholarship option, moving down to the Division III, Division II, or FCS level in order to cut costs. So that's a pretty sad thing to hear about, but it is real. It is on the table. And they're also looking at a non-football option. So we'll see how things go in that conversation. So their new athletic director has one responsibility: fix football. Otherwise, you know what's going to happen if they don't fix football. So their faculty administration thinks that they can utilize athletics to help bail out the university by making those potential changes. So hopefully they can figure things out where Akron doesn't have to leave the MAC and drop down a level. I hope not. So that's just something to keep an eye out that nobody else knows about yet.
So I was curious when you said the new Akron athletic director, because I met the current one, but this was as of like 2022. So they have a new one in Andrew Goodrich. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And there's two topics I want to go over. So the last big one is the Michigan versus NCAA. I've seen people post that they could still do some negotiations. That is absolutely not true. They're past that stage. All that's left now is for the NCAA to make their ruling. So hopefully that'll be done within the next 90 days. And that just rings a bell. For that whole Deloitte and NIL issue, the way that it will work with Deloitte, we'll say no to it as an example for any NIL deal that comes in. So pretend I am an athlete. I submit an NIL deal. It gets rejected. I can either renegotiate a new deal. I can go to arbitration. So those are two different options. You can renegotiate a deal, try to resubmit it, or you can go to arbitration. So that arbitration is a brilliant thing for Deloitte to do because that gives them some ability to resolve conflict without immediate lawsuit, because all these idiots on X will say, oh, there's a lawsuit at the very first deal that gets rejected. Well, that's not true, because they have a process in place where you can resubmit it or go to arbitration so you can get that resolved. Why would you throw a lawsuit before trying to get it resolved? So if nothing gets resolved, yeah, of course, then a person or an organization could try to sue. You can sue anybody for anything anyway, so that's not really even a smart talking point to begin with. But so that's everything for that. And then for the scheduling in the ACC, Florida State specifically, they want to play Big Ten games. So their athletic director is trying to figure out which Big Ten school can they play for some non-conference games. And I'm not going to say how I know it, just I know it. And then at the spring meetings, there was a very high-level confidential meeting. I can talk about this now because it is past the meeting. So there were 4 schools that met with the ACC commissioner to talk about scheduling. So they're wanting to make some changes in the ACC for football scheduling. So this was outside of their spring meeting. So this was a very high-level private meeting that was done because Florida State wants to play Virginia Tech more often. Notre Dame scheduled a every year contract for the next however many years that was with Clemson. That was a protective move versus nothing else. So it's just a way of Notre Dame protecting their future schedules to have a quality game on their schedule. And the same thing with Clemson. No matter what happens, Clemson will have that Notre Dame game on their schedule. So if the AQs go through, I'm going to be an extremely happy individual because I know there's numerous conversations going on about brand versus brand games and non-conference schedules if the AQs go through. Well, if they don't go through, I'm going to be very upset because the non-conference games are going to get killed for quality matchups. Numerous amount of people have already been very open about canceling games if they don't get their AQs. Oh, that's right. The USC is one of the biggest pushers within the Big Ten Conference to push for the AQs in order to help save their game against Notre Dame. Nobody knows that, but I knew about it. But USC is one of the biggest pushers to get that AQs.
Okay. Makes total sense. Yeah, USC, it's difficult to criticize their scheduling approach because, yes, Notre Dame's on the schedule every year, and they typically add another difficult game. Not this year, but certainly, of course, LSU this past year, and usually they tack on somebody else. That's a fairly difficult game to add to Notre Dame.
Yep, that's pretty much all I have for today. So quite a bit of information. Took forever to go over it, like it usually does when I talk. So I don't talk in the public very often, but when I do, it's always loaded.
Well, I do appreciate you giving us this time. Everyone, it's Genetics56. You see the Twitter/X handle there on the banner, and you see his X page there, and he is consistently handing down information from his various resources and connections and everything that he explained here. So, sir, we appreciate you giving us time several times a year to come on here and provide your knowledge and intel.
Yep, it may be quite a long time again before I speak, but well, it depends on how things go. I may have something to say 6 months or 2 or 3 years from now. You never know.
Well, we are here. We are here. Enjoy the college football season, particularly in the Big Ten.
Yep. Alrighty. So thank you for your time today and have a good night then.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yep, bye-bye.
It's our guy, Genetics56, as he mentions there. He rarely will go and speak in public about these things. So we do appreciate that he respects us enough to make us a stop. And I don't know that he has many others or any others. So we appreciate him and a few other people in this space that give us the time that they do not provide for others. So we got something going here at the Voice of College Football. So we thank all of you for your time. And I will be back at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Remember that the Amazon link's in the description section of all the videos. When you shop on Amazon, it doesn't cost you a penny. And I got a super chat coming in. Adam, thank you so much for that. Of course, Adam says here, Drew Aller. Let me guess. Drew Aller is going to lead an 85-yard touchdown drive in the final 90 seconds of the national championship game and cap off his Heisman Trophy winning season by leading Penn State to a national championship. That's what Adam has on his super chat. I don't even have to read it. I already know. Drew Aller's going to throw 40 touchdowns and no interceptions this year, win the Heisman Trophy, lead Penn State to its first national championship since 1986. It should be 94. 1986. I'm just going to read it to confirm because he phrased it just slightly different than I just did. Drew Aller will throw 2 critical interceptions, leading to 2 Penn State losses. No class. I'm having problems connecting the class portion of that to the football playing ability. Anyway, the settlement violates antitrust laws because it benefits the wealthy schools and creates unfair competition. Adam, thank you so much for the contribution here. Wouldn't that be something, Ralph? That's an obvious statement you're making, Ralph, but I got to say, it just popped into my head the other day. I thought, well, Penn State does win the national championship. That would look pretty darn good for the Big Ten. And there's a little bit more pressure on James Franklin because his two main nemesis in the Big Ten did break through. You know, look at Michigan before Jim Harbaugh broke through and won the national championship. Sure, they broke through 2 years earlier to win the Big Ten finally for the first time since 2004. But Michigan broke through. And then Ohio State, well, they're in a lead and they're always in contention, but it was the 2014 Urban Meyer championship team that was last for Ohio State, and boom, they break through. Okay, Drew Aller's back. Kaytron Allen, Nick Singleton are back. A star-studded offensive line, excellent defense. You got Jim Knowles to run your defense. It's all there for you. You're the next one in line, Penn State. The other two broke through. This Penn State season would look a little bit different had the SEC continued its run. And let's say Texas won the national championship. Let's say Texas cashed in that late touchdown against Ohio State and then won the game in overtime. And Texas won the national championship instead of Ohio State. And let's say Alabama was able to make a play. All they needed was like one play in that game in the Rose Bowl against Michigan. And Alabama won the national championship. And Texas then won the national championship. There would be a lot less pressure on James Franklin. Sure, it would be like, when are you going to deliver? When are you going to finally beat Michigan and Ohio State? But Michigan and Ohio State would not have national championships. But those two did break through and did get it done. Would that not be something? I do love my Ohio quarterbacks who play at Penn State. I do. Maybe we'll see Todd Blackledge at Big Ten Media Days this year. I have to decide this weekend if I'm going to go to Big Ten Media Days. It's in Vegas. It seems that it's enticing, tantalizing. I will be back here on Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And as we did with Wisconsin today, we will have a random team to review. A random team for 2025 to review on Friday. Great day of guests here at the Voice of College Football with our Genetics 56 Big Ten information guy, Kuz's Corner, and also our guy, Shahan from CBS Sports. See you on Friday.